Hello everyone, Xeno What If here. Bring in part 10 of What If Sonic and his friends were in Remnant. Link in the description of the fanfiction of this What If. Listen here YouTube. I do not own anything and this is not a scam. The Grand Tour. Ozpin couldn't help but get a sense of deja vu as he sat in his office with night having fallen over Beacon Academy, primarily in the fact that a certain general was pacing back and forth just like how he did when they awaited for the report from Mountain Glen when Sonic and the others were looking for Eggman and the White Fang. James. Don't, Oz. The general held up his hand as he stopped pacing. Don't try and tell me, it's going to be okay, when you don't know for certain. I wasn't going to say that. Ozpin retorted. It's been hours since we've lost contact with any of them. Your students are practically missing and you don't seem the least bit concerned. Ironwood questioned as he grasped Ozpin's desk. Of course, I am concerned. The headmaster of Beacon stood up. But allowing yourself to be wound up like this is not helping. Why not send a search party? I can spare the ships. Ironwood suggested. Would you know even where to look? And if so, would you know what you were looking for? Ozpin responded. Even if it is a simple scouting party, they could simply be lost the same way Sonic, his friends, and our students would be, and we would have gained nothing. How can you be so calm, right now? Ironwood questioned. You've seen the reports. Mutated Grim. Someone using Merlot's old work. What if we're playing into Eggman's hands by doing nothing? Because I have been paying attention, James. Ozpin replied as he slowly sat back down. I've seen what Sonic and the others are capable of, having easily dealt with threats that even veteran huntsmen would struggle with. And yes, I realize that the students with them can be considered green, but I'm also aware that they've forged meaningful bonds with Sonic and his friends, some have even demonstrated acts of teamwork and unity. I have a feeling they'll be able to look out for each other. And yes, I will admit, there is risk in us simply not doing anything, but without even a general direction of where to go, or an idea what to find, we'd be simply running around in circles and making no progress. All we can do is wait and have faith. Ironwood sighed, understanding the logic in Ozpin's argument, aside from one thing. Perhaps your students siding with Sonic might not be the best idea, Oz. I don't follow. Ozpin replied. You have to be aware that they are starting to suspect that we know something we have yet to tell them. Ironwood told him. And if your students get involved with that, two of which happen to be Kiro's nieces, that could cause some friction with not only your students, but even our own inner circle, and we could fall apart, playing right into her hands. Do you believe we should tell them about her? Ozpin asked. No, Ironwood said immediately. Despite their powers, or their claims that they've fought beings like her or more powerful, that part one seriously doubt, they don't know her or what she can do. Eggman is one thing, but she is something else. So, what do you propose we do, James? Treat them as enemies. Ozpin responded. Given the positive impact they've had on some of our students, particularly Ruby and Yang as you have mentioned, that would only cause the friction you described. I'm not suggesting anything blunt like that. Ironwood said. I'm not stupid, Oz. I didn't say you were. Ozpin quickly said. Perhaps we could find a means to separate them. Ironwood offered. Have Sonic and his friends go out on missions away from the academy, that would allow us to bring your students back in on our side of things. That sounds like manipulation, James. Ozpin commented. We have done similar things in the past. Ironwood reminded. Only when we have no other options. Ozpin replied. And even if we did consider that an option, Sonic wouldn't go for it. Need I remind you that his primary target is Eggman, whom seems to have his sights set on the Vital Festival, which is just around the corner. If we send them on a series of faraway missions within that time frame, it will more or less confirm that we are aware they may be onto us. Then what are we supposed to do? Ironwood questioned in irritation, tired of this argument going in circles with no end in sight. Ozpin gave a sigh. I wish I had an answer, James. I really do. But there may be no easy answer to this. Perhaps Sonic will find out about her, no matter how much we try to stop that. We just need to watch our step, and ensure that we don't become his enemy as well. Before Ironwood would even offer a response, there was an alert on the scroll built into Ozpin's desk. What is it? The general asked. Is them. Ozpin couldn't see the caller ID, but it wasn't like anyone can just call him up on his own private line. Let's find out. He answered the call, displaying a hologram from the table of a man that neither of them had expected to see. "Hello, Ozpin. So nice to see you again." Dr. Merlot greeted in a polite manner. Merlot, Ozpin's eyes narrowed. How is this possible?" the shocked Ironwood questioned. "Ah, James. I didn't expect to see you here. What a pleasant surprise," Merlot acknowledged. "We thought you had perished in the Mountain Glen disaster, a tragedy you played no small part in," Ozpin said. "It was a rather close call, but I survived. Well, mostly," he showed his robotic arm. "But 'twas a mere speed bump on the superhighway of scientific research. You couldn't possibly imagine the ramifications of my latest research. It was you," Ironwood's look of surprise into one of anger. "You're responsible for the mutated Grimm." "Indeed, though I cannot take all the credit," Merlot began. "While the mutants originated from my own research, some of the ideas were provided by our mutual acquaintance of Dr. Eggman. He's provided me with such fascinating images and stories of the folklore from his world. Creatures that make even the Grimm look downright pleasant." "You've allied yourself with Eggman?" Ozpin asked. "Technically, he came to me, but yes," Merlot confirmed. "I'll tell you, it's been enjoyable to meet a fellow scientist who happens to share quite the ambition, not to mention he's easy to talk with, unlike the late Arthur Watts who insisted on rubbing his nose to flaunt his supposed superiority. He is a madman who seeks to dominate our world," Ironwood exclaimed. "And, from all honesty, you seem no different. Trying to make the world a better place is wrong, James?" Merlot asked. "I would think someone who works as hard as you do for the same reason would understand my efforts, even if you aren't a scientist. You are experimenting with the Grimm and trying to make them even more dangerous than they already are," Ironwood pointed out. "How is that making the world a better place? It's amazing that you even survived Mountain Glen's collapse, Merlot," Ozpin said in a tone that seemed calm yet hid anger under the surface. "Was it sheer luck or part of your master plan? Would you believe me if I told you it wasn't my fault?" Merlot replied. "I believe you wouldn't take accountability for your actions," Ozpin responded. "Allow me to respond to that by answering James's previous question," Merlot began. "I will admit that Mountain Glen is something of a sore spot for me. I had captured a few Grimm in order to better study and learn about them, find a possible weakness that could allow humanity to overcome, perhaps even use them to further our own progress. But after Mountain Glen's collapse, I came to realize something. Perhaps it's not the Grimm we should be wary of, but what they are targeting." "What are you getting at?" Ironwood questioned. "Why is it that the Grimm are specifically targeting humanity, faunus included?" Merlot continued. "They don't seem all that interested in animals, unless it's a territorial dispute, but the Grimm seem to view humanity as their primary prey above all else. There is a similar scenario that takes place inside the human body. When a person gets sick, the body releases antibodies to combat the disease, and I have come to believe that is what is happening here." "Get to the point," Ironwood demanded. "Humanity has been the dominant species on Remnant for thousands of years and look at what has happened." Merlot went on. "Bigotry, conflict and war, which only succeeds in creating destruction. Take the Schnee Dust Company for instance, they were one of the primary parties that led to destruction of most of Vacuo's natural resources, turning what was once a beautiful oasis into a wasteland. Not to mention their ongoing conflict with the White Fang could lead into a full-blown human versus faunus war, with both sides determined to wipe the other out. Which has not happened, and never will," Ozpin said. "Because the Grimm keep humanity in check, just as white blood cells keep the human body healthy." Merlot replied. "The Grimm are Remnant's natural defense system against the human infection. Please don't misunderstand, I don't hate humanity per se, and I'm not looking for the complete genocide of the human race. I just feel they need to be contained, properly managed. If I am able to further enhance the Grimm, humanity will be better controlled, and Remnant can enter a new era of prosperity." "You're out of your damn mind," Ironwood exclaimed. "The Grimm can't be controlled, that's impossible." "I think we both know that's not true," Merlot revealed, much to their surprise. "What are you saying?" Ozpin asked, having a bad feeling about this. "Dr. Eggman has informed me that there is a force out there that is guiding the Grimm," Merlot answered. "He hasn't gone into the details, but I suspect it's something equivalent to the sympathetic nervous system which controls the human body's immune system to fight off diseases. You have no idea what you are involving yourself in, Merlot. Ozpin warned. Let us agree to disagree. Merlot replied. I'll say it has truly been a pleasure catching up with the both of you, but I have some guests to host. Farewell, gentlemen. The hologram vanished, ending the call. It was silent for a few moments as Ozpin happened to cast a glance to Ironwood, who kept his back turned. Even if Oz couldn't see his face, he knew the general long enough to tell that he was more than a little anxious. He knows about her. More likely he is aware there is something hiding in the shadows, not her specifically. Ozpin commented. But this implies that Eggman is working with her. Ironwood still kept his back turned. Or is at least knows of her presence. Ozpin replied. But what if they are? Ironwood exclaimed as he turned around so Ozpin could see the look of fear and anger on his face. That makes her all the more dangerous. You yourself said it was a possibility, and this almost confirms it. You are right, and I cannot deny the possibility any longer. Ozpin admitted. But we cannot afford to act so recklessly. What if this leads to Sonic finding out about her? Ironwood questioned. Then we will tell him, and his friends. Ozpin said. But unless he learns it first, we say nothing. We are in an unknown territory, and the best way to approach that is to take it one step at a time, or even a few steps back to find an easier way. And sometimes all it takes is the will to push forward. Ironwood retorted. Unless you find yourself walking headfirst into a minefield. Ozpin replied. And I believe we are heading in that direction. Merlot Island. Having made their way deeper into the island, Team Sonic, RWBY, Dark, and JNPR arrived at a series of pipelines that seemed to lead to a building deeper in. While the system of pipes was something of interest, the group seemed more interested in what was being pumped through the pipes. Ew, this place smells terrible. Ruby said as she plugged her nose. It smells worse than an outhouse. Nora agreed as she too plugged her nose. It's probably whatever this stuff is. Sonic gestured to one of the many puddles of a bubbling sickly green liquid that were scattered throughout the area. This place is clearly not up to appropriate sanitary standards. Weiss commented. Not important right now, princess. But totally agreed. Rogue said. What even is this stuff? John tried poking at a puddle with his sword, only for Shadow to grab him by the wrist, stopping him and firmly shake his head toward the blonde. Omega. The black hedgehog looked towards the former badnik as he scanned a few puddles as well as the general area, with Tails doing the same as he sat in the Cyclone's walker mode. This substance is an unknown chemical that does not match any known element in the periodic table. Omega replied, though there is a highly mutable subject detected within its chemical makeup. So, wait, this is what Merlot's using to make those mutant Grim? Yang questioned. More like a raw component. Tails tried to explain as he looked at the data of the substance that he had scanned with his Miles Electric. I think Merlot is on this island for this specific substance. These pipes extract it and transport it to his main facility where he has it properly processed to make his formula. But wouldn't that mean this is a natural phenomenon? Pyrrha questioned. This place smells anything but natural. Ruby still kept her nose plugged. In our world, there are places where deadly chemicals can appear naturally under certain circumstances. Tails said, I can't imagine Remnant being any different. Yeah, you'd be surprised what happens after a volcanic eruption. Knuckles added. But this stuff, Blake looked towards one puddle with disgust. I've lived outside the kingdoms for most of my life, but I've never seen anything like this. Neither have I, and I've been all over Mistral growing up. Ren added. There isn't anything like this in Solitas either. Weiss also put in. It's probably only found here on this specific island, hence the reason Merlot built his operations here. Shadow assumed, kneeling toward one puddle to look at it closely. Although, I can't help but wonder what sort of phenomena took place to produce a substance like this. Well then let's go find him and ask him ourselves. Sonic said. Amy noticed Tails briefly deactivating his cyclone before stepping down and walking toward a puddle of the substance. Tails, what are you doing? Collecting a sample. Tails answered as he pressed a button on the Miles Electric and aimed the device at a puddle. This produced a tiny needle from the top, which Tails used to poke the puddle to extract a microscopic sample, which would be enough for him. Even if it's just a raw ingredient, if it can directly affect the Grim, we may be able to make that anti-Grim weapon. Though it would also help if we had access to Merlot's complete formula. What about that mimic guy? John reminded as Tails got back into the cyclone and powered it back up. I mean, isn't it kinda risky going into unknown territory with a shapeshifter on the loose? Then we just stick together. Yang said as if it were obvious. But we're too big a group. Merlot would see us coming easily. Weiss said. The guy already knows we're here, it's not like we have the element of surprise. Nora argued. There is still a chance we can get separated, and Mimic can take advantage of that. Ren put in. But we've seen that he can't copy our powers. So, if we fight, we can figure it out whether or not the person we're fighting is an imposter. Knuckles offered. Or we can ask each other questions. Questions only we would know. Ruby said. And if the person in question is someone that you really don't know all that personally? Shadow asked skeptically with a raised eyebrow, causing Ruby to sulk as that was actually a really good point. Even if we do figure it out, I don't think we should underestimate the guy. Rouge said. If Eggman is willing to send Mimic as backup for Merlot, he's gotta be dangerous. There is also Merlot's machines, and more mutated Grimm to be concerned with. Omega added. We are entering a facility he has complete control over. Total destruction of the enemy will be difficult. Blake's eyes widened. I just thought of something, what if Merlot is Eggman's partner? The one that Ozpin and the others are worried about. I don't think so. Amy shook her head. Merlot's dangerous, but until now, everyone thought he was dead. And it seems like whoever else is involved is someone that Ozpin's group is currently fighting. It doesn't quite add up. Knuckles said. Again, we can find most if not all our answers when we find him and Mimic. Sonic said to everyone. But yeah, we're going right into the lion's den, so let's try and stick together as best as we can, groups of 2 at minimum. Sounds like a plan. Kira nodded in agreement. Then let's not keep them waiting. Ruby said as the group followed the pipeline system, figuring it would lead them right to Merlot's base. Unknown to most of the group, the same, red-eyed raven that had been following them to the island still continued to tail them from a distance. It hadn't lost sight of them once and it wasn't planning on losing them now. The heroes soon found themselves standing at what appeared to be the main entrance of the facility, which appeared to be built into a large hill, but there was no doubt a majority of it was extended underground. So, do we just blast our way in or? Yang mused, only to be interrupted as the large gateway slowly opened up to reveal the inside of the facility. That certainly saves the effort. Sonic said as they made their way into the facility, the students ready to draw their weapons at a moment's notice, with the raven following them inside, but sticking close to the ceiling, perched on a tiny antenna that stuck out from an upper part of the wall. Shadow happened to notice the presence of the bird, glancing toward it with a somewhat suspicious glance before moving. The group of 15 stood as close together as possible as they looked around the inside of the large laboratory. It appeared as one would expect, being made entirely out of metal with pipes, vents, monitors, and cameras everywhere they looked, the floor underneath of them having hexagon-shaped tiles that seemed large enough for a person to stand on. But this was only the entrance tunnel as there was another doorway at the end, but before anyone made a move to get any closer. Omega, can you see if there's anyone or anything on the other side? Rouge asked. Scanning. Omega's optics shifted from X-ray to infrared and even ultraviolet before reporting back. There are no hostiles on the other side of the door. Why does that make me feel even more nervous? Weiss spoke for everyone as Tails moved the cyclone closer to the door, having spotted a controlled terminal near the side. He tried to hack into it remotely via his Miles Electric, but soon found himself having trouble. Aw nuts. What is it? John asked. Tons of firewalls, I can't hack into his system remotely. Tails answered. I may need to connect directly with a computer or something inside, but we gotta go deeper in. Can you get the door open? Sonic asked. Already done. Tails was at least able to do that, opening the door big enough for the group to step in. Greetings, and welcome to Merlot Industries, where we're building a better tomorrow, today. They heard Merlot's voice greet through a series of speakers around them, prompting many of the students to draw their weapons. Well, this just keeps getting weirder. Ruby commented. Was that really him? Or one of those weird commercial entrance things? Nora asked. I'd say 50-50. Rouge assumed. Guess this guy's something of an attention hog, too. I wouldn't go that far. Merlot himself said as his face appeared on one of the monitors on the wall, getting all their attention. I just happen to take pride in my work, as well as what it can achieve. You mean aside from destruction and death? Knuckles questioned. Why not come out and face us? I have a better idea. Merlot replied as a series of the hexagon-shaped tiles began to glow bright blue, specifically those that each of the heroes were standing on. Suddenly, a series of energy barriers appeared to trap each of them, one by one, much to their shock. Even Tails in the cyclone was caught as that took a group of tiles to create a larger barrier. Before any of them had time to resist, the panels suddenly dropped as they were all pulled underground. The black bird that had followed them inside tried to fly into the hole where Yang had previously stood, only for it closed just as the bird made contact. It slammed into the hard metal briefly before flying back up to the nearest air vent in the wall near the ceiling. Once it broke its way into the metal frame and made its way deeper inside, something happened that caused the bird to vanish, and a person to take its place. The person in question was a woman, wearing a V-neck black and red style top with a black pleated skirt with black shorts underneath and some black beaded necklaces. She also wore a red RWBY tied around her waist with red armored gauntlets and shoulder pads. The woman also had black mid-thigh heeled high boots with armor plating. She also happened to have a sheathed sword at her side. Her skin was pale with long black hair, though her face couldn't be seen due to the grim mask she wore. One could see a pair of red eyes underneath if they looked closely enough. Damn it, the woman cursed internally. She wasn't fast enough. Though she was fortunate enough this air vent was here. Taking a hit in her bird form did make it harder to maintain it. If she happened to turn back right then and there, Merlot would have seen her and that would have caused a number of complications. But it seems that so far, her presence was unnoticed. Though there was still the matter of the children, two in particular that she was most concerned with. Though she only had a connection with one of them, and she could use that to get to her, but that would reveal her presence to potentially everyone, which would only cause even more complications. There was also the matter of that shapeshifter as well as the aliens the kids seemed to have taken a liking to, whom she still was unsure of at the moment. She can't afford to reveal her presence to any of them yet. So, for now, they're going to have to handle themselves, but that didn't mean she couldn't help in some way. Merlot seems focused on them for now. So, she could track him down and go to him directly and force him to stop this insanity he was doing. That seemed like the best way to go about this. Once she regained her senses and came up with her plan, the woman turned into the bird once again and flew deeper into the vents. A hole had opened up in the floor of an unknown location as Sonic was sent upwards before landing. He looked around the large chamber he was suddenly in to find it was a completely enclosed space, though it was the size of a human-made racetrack for cars. In fact, it even had a track that went around in a long loop. So much for sticking together. The blue blur muttered. Sonic the Hedgehog. Merlot's face appeared on a large monitor near the top of the chamber. I'm quite honored to be in the presence of such a mighty hero. You appear to be so small and yet, you possess power that has defeated even the likes of deities. Truly marvelous. You can get in line for the autograph later, fanboy. Now where are my friends? Sonic demanded. Unharmed for the moment, Merlot replied. Your otherworldly companions are in chambers much like this one. The abilities you and your friends have are truly incredible, so much so that I would love for you to help me conduct an experiment or two so that I can better improve upon my grim experiments. Sorry pal, but I'm a hedgehog, not a guinea pig. Sonic said before his eyes narrowed. Now where are my friends, and I mean all of them. If you are speaking of those students, I'm leaving them in Mimic's care. That really seemed to irk Sonic, something Merlot noticed. Perhaps you can channel that attitude into this little experiment. I would kindly appreciate it, because I created this specific grim with you in mind. A large hatch opened in the very center of the chamber as an enormous creature, trapped within a larger glass cube, was revealed. It appeared to have the body of a Nevermore but was quite larger. It only had a single head with two wings, though it also had a pair of glowing green eyes which indicated that it was a mutant. But what really stood out about this beast was that its wings appeared to be on fire. Many of my mutants are based of creatures of myth and folklore from your world, provided by our mutual acquaintance. Merlot explained, referring to Eggman. This particular Nevermore has been enhanced with my mutagen, and I made sure to increase the power of its own speed so that it can match pace with you. Those flames on its wings are a result of fire dust that I've infused into it. You put dust inside that thing? Sonic questioned in surprise. Yes, it seems my formula also acts as an impressive binding agent between the Grim and dust if modified right. I call this ingenious creation, the Apollo. Merlot said as the glass cube opened, releasing the creature as it flew upwards with a roar. I do hope you enjoy each other's company. The mutated Nevermore, apparently known as the Apollo, spotted Sonic and gave a roar before it flung its wings to launch a series of flaming feathers his way. Whoa! Sonic just barely dodged them before zooming away on the track with a trail of blue energy, but the second the feathers made contact, they exploded in a series of flames, though Sonic was already far enough away to not get caught in the explosion. The Apollo flew after Sonic, following him along the track with sufficient speed that it was able to catch up with him. Alright, let's see what you can do. He challenged the Nevermore directly as he picked up his speed. RWBY gave a slight scream as she was dropped down from the ceiling and landed hard on the metallic ground. Ow! She pulled herself up to look around at her location. It seemed pretty empty for the most part. Hey, where is everyone? Sonic, Young, Weiss. She tried to call out to her friends. But then she heard another scream as a port on the ceiling opened and Pyrrha fell out, though she was quick to land on her feet in one hand, albeit somewhat shakily, but she seemed alright. Pyrrha. RWBY was ready to come and help her but was startled when she saw the older girl point Milo at her in its rifle form. You look like RWBY, but how I can be sure you're the real one and not Mimic assuming her form again? Pyrrha narrowed her eyes. Darn it. RWBY cursed herself for forgetting that. Of course, they'd be worried about that after having been separated. She had to think of something to convince Pyrrha she was the real one, but how? Despite considering her a friend, she wasn't as close to Pyrrha as she was with her teammates, or even John. Wait, John. That was it. Back when John was being bullied by Cardin, he was attacked by an Ursa in the Forever Fall Forest. RWBY began as she raised her hands. You, me, Sonic, Weiss and Tails were all there. You used your polarity to help him, but you also said that we shouldn't tell him that you helped. Maybe you wanted to help him build up some confidence, right? Pyrrha lowered her guard. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Well, how do I know you're the real Pyrrha? RWBY asked as she reached for Crescent Rose. The older girl telekinetically lifted Milo and Akoa with her polarity semblance and spun them in the air for a moment before dropping them back into her hands. Mimic can't copy our powers. RWBY sighed in relief. Sorry. No, it's alright. Pyrrha assured with a smile as she offered RWBY her hand to shake, which RWBY accepted with a smile of her own. I'm glad you're alright, RWBY. You too. But where are we anyway? Do you know where everyone else is? She asked. No, I suspect we were separated because it would be easier to deal with us than the whole group all at once. Pyrrha assumed. Bingo. The two girls turned around to see none other than Mimic, the real one and not one of his bioids, sitting casually on a ledge near the ceiling. When someone's greatest strength is their teamwork, it makes sense to split them up, don't you think? He said as he dropped down to face the pair as they had their weapons drawn. Rather bold of you to show yourself. Pyrrha commented. As opposed to trying to deceive us by assuming the form of our friends. You already figured out I can't copy powers, there'd be no point in going that route. Mimic replied. I'll admit I got a little reckless before, probably should have gone after you kids before the hedgehogs. But if you think shapeshifting is only good for tricking people, you're about to be proven dead wrong. How could you? RWBY muttered. Mimic raised an eyebrow in partial confusion. How could I take your shape? You're the youngest so. No, how could you betray your team? RWBY questioned. Shadow told us about the diamond cutters. You guys were heroes. You were protecting your world from Eggman. But you betrayed your friends, and now you're working with him. Why? Ah, so you're one of those. Mimic commented, thinking it's all about the good fight and being a hero. He smirked mockingly towards RWBY. They weren't my friends, they weren't even my comrades. They were a means to an end. I was in it to reap the rewards. When their big crusade put my life on the line, it wasn't a difficult choice. Let this be an important lesson to you, kid. Heroes become martyrs, professionals stay alive. RWBY's eyes widened in shock. Did he seriously just brush off the death of his teammates like that? A means to an end. Not a difficult choice. What kind of monster? Don't bother, RWBY. Some people can't be reasoned with. Kira told her before narrowing her eyes at Mimic. The best way to deal with cowards like him is to lock them away forever. You can try, but we won't make it easy for ya. Mimic snapped his fingers, causing a series of doors to open around them. Stepping out into the room were at least 24 Merlot Industries robots. But unlike those that they encountered before when they first arrived on the island, these were bulkier, had white armor, and were armed with miniguns and grenade launchers. RWBY and Kira were forced to come back to back as they were surrounded. Alright kids, ready to have some fun. Mimic grinned with sinister intention. Knuckles scoffed in annoyance, having been dropped off in an area that seemed to be part of the underground the facility was built in, evident by the stone ground and walls, save for one that was attached to the metallic ceiling he was dropped in from. Splitting us up, huh? You must be Knuckles the Echidna. Merlot's voice broadcasted from the speakers around him. I've been told you're among the physically strongest of your team, with your power rivaling that of Sonic's own speed. Why don't you come out here and I'll give you a personal demonstration? Knuckles challenged. Oh, I would love a demonstration of your Herculean strength. But how about against a more worthy opponent? The only metal wall in the room opened up as a mutated Grim stepped forward. It bore the appearance of a gorilla, a type of Grim Knuckles had yet to see in person. It was incredibly large and appeared to walk on all fours. Its eyes glowed bright green with green spikes poking out of its back. Though it also appeared to be encased in armor that appeared to be made entirely out of stone. This type of Grim is known as a Buringal, and it is among one of the physically strongest of the creatures of Grim, even more so than an Ursa. Merlot explained. They're not necessarily native to Vale, but they do live on the same continent. In addition to my own formula further enhancing its already incredible strength, I've also equipped this one with earth dust to grant it some rather durable armor. I call this subject, Kong. The mutated Buringal stood on its back and pounded on its chest before roaring at Knuckles. Though the red echidna seemed unfazed by both the creature's roar and Merlot's explanation. There's more to a fight than just raw strength. But I'll take on your beast and find my friends. Knuckles raised his own fists as he stood ready to face the monster in front of him. Let's go. Weiss tried to use her scroll to contact her friends and teammates, but all she got was static, causing her to groan in frustration. Of course. I suppose I'll have to find them on my own. Perhaps I can help. She turned around to see a young woman who bore a strong resemblance towards herself, with fair skin, blue eyes, and long white hair tied back in a bun on the left side of the back of her head, along with bangs on the right side of her face. She wore a white and blue outfit resembling that of the Atlas military. Winter. Weiss was surprised at what appeared to be her older sister. What are you doing here? General Ironwood dispatched me here after he had lost contact with you and your friends. Winter explained. I'm glad I found you though. She said with a smile. You came here by yourself? Weiss asked. There wasn't enough time to dispatch a squadron, so I volunteered to go on my own. Winter replied. We should hurry and find your friends, they can't be that far away. When she was about to walk away, the tip of a blade appeared by the side of her face. Weiss had drawn Myrtanaster and had it pointed close to Winter's neck, her eyes narrowed. Is there a problem, Weiss? I have no doubt my sister would come and help me if I truly needed it, but there are two things about Winter that you need to be aware of, Weiss began. First, she is in Atlas. If she was going to arrive in Vale, she would have already informed me. There would be no time for her to fly all the way to this island. And second, she told me that she won't always be around to save me, so I've learned not to become too dependent on her in a combat situation. You'll have to better than this if you'll want to fool me, Mimic. Though Weiss did see through the deception, she was unaware this wasn't the real Mimic, but a Bioid with his biodata. The fake Winter chuckled as she turned around, revealing her changed eyes to resemble that of Mimic's before she spoke, still maintaining the face and voice of Winter. Well, aren't you a smart little princess? The imposter taunted as Weiss kept her weapon trained on it. Here I thought I could appeal to your emotions, but I guess you really are an ice queen. So I've been called. Now, if you would be so kind as to reveal your true form. I'd rather not have you sully my sister's face and voice. Weiss demanded. Well, I happen to like this pretty face. The imposter taunted with a smirk. But if you insist, the Mimic Bioid changed its form to reveal not Mimic, but middle-aged man with white hair and a mustache and a business suit. This was the form of Jacques Schnee. How about this face? Weiss' eyes narrowed further. This is getting ridiculous. I know you're an imposter, and I honestly have no issue in standing against my father. So, I've heard. Mimic Jacques went on. Eggman gave me the gist on you. A runaway heiress trying to redeem her family after dear old daddy ruined it. So, I'm guessing there's some domestic troubles too, right? Parental abuse. When he saw the anger in Weiss' eyes, that all but confirmed it. Well, in that case, he swiftly shot under Myrtanaster and threw a punch to Weiss' throat with one hand while grabbing her sword arm with the other and spun her around before throwing her away. Though her aura did protect her, Weiss was caught off guard by the sudden attack. But as she pulled herself up, she was even further surprised to see that her sword was no longer in her hands. I imagine what's about to happen next will be quite torturous. The mimic Bioid taunted, still maintained his appearance of Jacques while holding Myrtanaster in his hands. Shadow gazed around at what appeared to be an inactive assembly line, no doubt for more of Merlot's robots as a series of unresponsive conveyor belts were lined across the long and large room. I've heard much about you, Shadow the Hedgehog. Merlot's voice was heard through the speakers. You believe yourself to be the ultimate life form, the most powerful being on your world. How fascinating. Shadow offered no response but simply leapt down to a lower belt, ignoring Merlot as he tried to find his own way out. Eggman also told me how you might be most rude out of your party. While I don't take offense that often, I do enjoy a good conversation. Merlot said, but once again, Shadow said nothing. Well, if you won't talk to me, then how about you just show me what you're capable of? The assembly line started to activate, all the conveyor belts began to move, something that had briefly stopped Shadow, but he paid it little mind. If you believe this is an ambush for my robots, you're mistaken. I'd actually like for you to test your mighty power against a very special test subject of mine. A low growl came from the floor at the very bottom of the assembly line, all the way down to the floor as hatch began to open up. Something climbed its way out, something truly hideous as Shadow looked with disgust. It was definitely a grim, and a mutated one at that. Its central body was that of a large skull the size of a car, with 3 sets of glowing green eyes and a pair of horns on its head. It also had a series of tentacles emerging from the skull, but what seemed the most disturbing was what was attached to said tentacles. They appeared to be different types of Grimm that had been infused with the tentacles. 4 of them had the faces and claws of Beowulfs, 2 more had the armored hides of Borbatusks, 2 up near the front of the skull appeared to have merged together to fuse with the lower body of an Ursa. It even had a Deathstalker's stinger on the back of its head. The monstrosity climbed its way up from the hole, using the monster-attached tentacles as hands as it slowly made its way up to face the black hedgehog. This particular breed of Grimm is known as a Kraken. Merlot revealed. A rare subterranean breed that was discovered in Mountain Glen. I'm sure you've noticed the other types of Grimm I fused with it via my mutagen, giving it a plethora of abilities. What's most striking is that each of these separate Grimm appear to have intended thought apart from the main body. I call this specific creature, the Chimera. I'm sure such a mighty beast will be quite the challenge for you, Shadow the Hedgehog. Hey, is anyone here? John walked alone through a hallway of the underground facility. Pyrrha, Nora, Ren, I'll even take Shadow or Rouge at this point. Wow, you must be Mr. Popular at school, huh? Turning to the side, John saw Mimic, or rather one of Mimic's Bioids in his form, leaning against the wall and looking toward his hand nonchalantly. Yeah, I know your type. Insecure and wanting to prove himself, so you think hanging out with the big kids makes you a man, or at least gives you reason to want to man up, huh? John drew his sword and shield. Tell me where my friends are. Are they your friends? The Mimic Bioid taunted. I've seen how you fight compared to them and, he tisked. It doesn't take a professional to see that you don't really know what you're doing. Half-baked combat skills, hell you're even shaking right now. He pointed towards John's shaky hands. You sure you're a huntsman? Like I'm gonna listen to a thing you say. A guy who sold out his own team. John tried to stand firm. So, show me how to find my friends, or I'm gonna make you. Make me, huh? The Mimic Bioid stood up straight before assuming the form of John himself. Give it your best shot. Amy held her Pico out as she faced a mutated creature of Grimm that Merlot had just released. This Grimm was a Beowulf, but it was certainly larger than any Alpha, even bigger than an Ursa Major. In addition to the glowing green spikes on its back, a series of ice spikes were present as well, with claws appearing to be made out of ice. When the monster roared, it let loose a frosty breath towards Amy, who rolled out of the way before rushing towards its side to strike her hammer and push it back, but it stood its ground before slashing its icy claws at her, which she blocked with the pole of her pico, but the force was enough to knock her back. "Enjoying your time, Ms. Rose?" Merlot asked through the speakers. "You should get this thing some shots," Amy exclaimed as the icy mutant Beowulf lunged at her, but she had pounded her hammer into the ground to vault herself up and over the monster. "Oh, but I did," Merlot explained. "In addition to my formula, I've also infused this Beowulf with ice dust. Based on a similar creature of myth from your world, I am calling this mighty hound, Garm. Now please play nice and feel free to give him a treat." "How about disciplinary school, instead?" Amy said as she faced the icy mutant once more. Yang had pulled herself up from the ground with an annoyed groan, having found herself alone in a hallway when she heard her name being called out. "Yang." She heard the voice of her sister from around the corner. "RWBY." The blonde seemed a little weary, not liking the sound of only hearing her sister's voice but not seeing her face. "Yang, help. Mimics got." RWBY's voice was cut off by the sound of a gunshot. "Keep your mouth shut, brat." Mimic's voice interrupted. "RWBY." Her big sister instincts kicking in, Yang rounded the corner, only to find herself getting shot multiple times, courtesy of Mimic, or rather another Beoid in his shape holding a gun, and standing all alone, with nobody else in sight. "You know I can change my shape, you didn't think I can't just do a voice?" Mimic questioned, while also speaking with RWBY's voice despite bearing his true appearance before shooting at Yang again to knock her down. Despite her aura protecting her, it still hurt a great deal. "The kid's your little sister, isn't she?" he asked, speaking in his natural voice as he walked over towards her while she was down. "That explains the recklessness, friendship and familial love, all weakness. You're better off looking after yourself. Just like me when I ditched my team." "You didn't ditch them, you killed them," Yang exclaimed as she shot herself upward and prepared to punch him. Only for the Mimic Beoid to take the form of RWBY once again. "Yang, please don't." The fake RWBY held her arms out in front of her, causing Yang to stop herself on pure instinct, something the imposter took full advantage of as he grabbed her by the arm she was using to punch with before hauling her over to slam her on the ground. "See." The fake RWBY gloated with a condescending smirk, causing Yang to gnash her teeth with her eyes burning red. "Ah, I see someone's got a temper. Let's try and work on that, shall we?" Rouge ducked and swerved under the strikes of a four-armed mutant Ursa before leaping over to try and strike it in the back of its neck with a kick, but her kick didn't seem to penetrate much of the mutant's bone armor. Not only that, Rouge was blown away by a burst of electricity shot out by the mutant's body, which sent her flying backwards and crashing toward the wall. "Shocking, don't you think, my dear?" Merlot teased. "Really? Shock puns with shock powers?" Rouge questioned irritably as she pushed herself up, facing the mutant Ursa once again as electricity surged around it. "I'm sure you've noticed that I've infused this particular mutant with lightning dust," Merlot explained. "Though my intent was to increase Callisto's speed with it to match your own, but it seems to have adapted to act as a defensive mechanism if its armor were to be attacked. A surprise, but a welcome one. Please continue, I'm looking forward to seeing how this experiment further develops. I'm intrigued to see if the properties of dust itself were to be mutated with my formula." "Glad to be of help, Doc," Rouge commented in obvious sarcasm as the mutant Ursa, apparently named Callisto, charged at her, slashing its claws, all of which were charged with electricity, but Rouge slid under the beast's legs and drew her purple hearts, readying herself for battle. Ren and Nora had been forced back to back, their weapons drawn, as 36 heavy-duty Merlot Industry androids surrounded them, with a Mimic Beoid leading the assault. "You know, if I'm being honest, I'm kinda drawing a blank with you two," he said to the two students. "The others I already figured out based on friendly intel or what I've observed. But you two, a ninja kid and a hammer-swinging maniac. Kinda basic, easy to deal with, but not a whole lot of fun to mess with. Then why don't we mess with you? It could be fun for us," Nora threatened. The truth was, Mimic asked Merlot to put these two together because they were something of an X factor to him for the same reasons. Eggman didn't have that much data on them, and he couldn't get much from what he saw himself, so they were something of a wild card. Best to eliminate them both together, though he did notice that they seemed to be rather close, but that could work more in his favor. I didn't say I couldn't mess with you. The mimic Bioid grinned. There's more than one way to mess with someone than just tricking them. He snapped his fingers, prompting the androids to open fire upon the pair. A hole was blown open in the wall as Omega stepped out into the open hallway from a large chamber, dragging half of a heavy android behind him, and leaving the rest of the squad of androids completely decimated. These models may be improved over those seen before but are still inferior to me. The former badnik scanned the head of the android he had in his grip to see if there was any way he could connect to the network like this. When he saw there was none, he crushed the head in his metallic grip and threw the remains to the ground. E-123 Omega. Built by Dr. Eggman, is the last and strongest of his E-series. Merlot observed from afar, speaking through the speakers as usual. You truly are a magnificent creation. I am looking forward to studying you, and possibly replicating your design. Perhaps I may even find a way to cybernetically enhance my Grim. Negative. Your only concern should be for your own safety. Omega replied. Surrender. While I will not terminate you, as you possibly have important intel, if you fail to comply, I will remove most of your limbs. The organic ones to be specific. You could try that, or you could help me in testing this particular Grim. A hatch opened to reveal a mutated Deathstalker, one that bore a striking resemblance to the Beowulf Deathstalker hybrid found in Mountain Glen. It even had the same kind of Beowulf upper body attached with scorpion pincers as opposed to its claws. But rather than have a stinger on its back, it had the slithering head of a Taijutsu. Sonic and two of his companions had trouble dealing with a similar creature at Mountain Glen. Merlot explained. I've made some upgrades since then. I call this experiment, Scorpio. Please feel free to give it your all. Whatever modifications you have made to your mutants is irrelevant. Omega said as he readied all his weapons to face the roaring monstrosity. It will still meet the same result, total destruction. Blake placed her hand against a nearby wall to rest, catching a breather from having destroyed a group of heavy androids, their broken and sparking parts behind her as she held Gamble's shroud in her free hand. But she didn't have much time to rest as one more robot appeared in front of her and was ready to gun her down. Blake readied herself to fight back, only for someone to grab the head from behind and snap it with a twist, causing the robot to topple over and reveal a certain someone that Blake didn't expect to see. I see you've been keeping busy. Adams said in a seemingly friendly tone. Hello Blake. Immediately, the Faunus girl aimed Gamble's shroud in its gun form at him. But he was quick to raise his hands. Easy, easy, I'm not here to hurt you. I know you don't trust me right now Blake, but I'm not with the White Fang anymore. I doubt that. But even if that were the case, how do I know I'm really speaking to the real Adam? She didn't take her eyes off him for a second. Adam sighed before smiling as he responded. After a mission, where I killed a human, one of many missions that ended the same way, I told you it was an accident. You asked me how many more there would be, and I said I wouldn't know. But then I brought up your parents, and that was wrong of me. Blake's eyes began to waver as her hand shook, despite still keeping her gun trained on him. We were the only ones there that night, and I never spoke of that to anyone, and I know you didn't either. You know me. Adam, Blake seemed convinced it was the real one, but that didn't mean she would lower her guard around him. Even as he slowly reached forward to gently grab her hand and lower her weapon. I promise, I'm here to help you. Something I should have done a long time ago. Tails had flown around a special chamber that seemed to be designed for a specific purpose. Multiple hovering blocks and bridges continued to move in various directions, up and down, left and right. When Tails had arrived with the cyclone, he had trouble converting it into its plane mode to keep it from crashing and damaging it even further, but he was able to pull it off. Currently, his prized invention was sitting at the floor of the large chamber, cloaked under a hard light dust shield he invented as he would let it sit to recharge its weapons while he looked for a way out. Why do I have a feeling this room was built for me? Tails assumed. Because that was the case, young Mr. Prower. Merlot's face appeared on a monitor directly in front of him. But before we get into that, I was hoping the two of us could have proper discussion, one brilliant mind to another. I have nothing to say to you. Tails stated. Why the hostility? I understand if you feel wary because of my alliance with Eggman, but I hold no animosity towards you or your friends. Rather, I'm fascinated by you. Merlot said. You are among the smartest of your group, honestly one of the most intelligent minds I've met, if anything from what Eggman has told me is any indication. Not to mention your unique vehicle. Not even Atlas has developed transformable machines like that. And yet, you're so young. Truly, you are one of a kind. Gee, don't I feel flattered? Tails said with sarcasm. Well, since you went off about me, how about I say what I know about you? You're every bit as crazy as Eggman is. Messing with something outside your control, making it even more dangerous than before. Why are you even experimenting with the Grimm in the first place? If you have something that can directly affect them, why not use it to help fight them and save lives? An understandable question, for which I have an answer. Merlot replied. The creatures of Grimm, while indeed dangerous, are this planet's natural defense system against the virus that is humanity. But just as I've told Ozpin and James, I harbor no hatred towards humanity, and I speak of the Faunus as well. I just find that their ongoing flaws, such as their greed and hatred, will inevitably lead to Remnant's destruction. Let me guess, you want to use the Grimm as weapons to put humanity under your heel. Tails narrowed his eyes. I don't intend to rule humanity, more so, observe and make sure they don't cause any more trouble. Merlot explained. Though I feel a culling is in order, to ensure that humanity's numbers reach a more manageable quantity. They'll be free to act as they see fit, just as long as they don't try to overpopulate and continue to deplete Remnant's resources. I could spend all night going over all the details of why that plan of yours is not only morally wrong, but also logically flawed and doomed to fail, but I'd rather not waste my breath. Tails said. I'd rather find the rest of my friends and put a stop to you. Merlot sighed in disappointment. A shame. I had hoped I would find some common ground with another brilliant mind. But your response was not completely unexpected. That said, you can still help me as I test another of my creations. A hatch at the top of the ceiling opened as a mutated Grimm fell down for a brief moment, before it extended its wings to keep it afloat. This monster appeared to be something of a cross between a Nevermore and a Taijutsu, as it had the body and wings of the former, while also having 4 heads of the latter, 2 being black and 2 being white. I'm sure someone as knowledgeable as you would see the resemblance of the mythological beast. I based this specimen off the Hydra. Merlot introduced. Now, let us test not only your survival skills, but your intelligence. Try to survive. As the screen shut down, the Hydra roared all 4 of its heads towards Tails as it flew directly at him, prompting him fly away as fast as he could. Meanwhile, Sonic continued to run in continuous loops on the track that Merlot had built specifically for him, feeling like a hamster on a wheel as the monster known as the Apollo continued to fly in pursuit of him. It certainly proved fast enough to keep up with the blue blur, even throwing a series of flaming feathers in his direction, but that was no different from dodging missiles or any other form of projectile as he simply shifted from one side to another, avoiding the resulting explosions. Alright, I think I've had enough of this boss. Sonic decided to stop playing defense as he kicked up his speed even further, zooming all the way around the track and coming up from behind at the Apollo. Before it even had a chance to turn around, Sonic leapt into the air and delivered a homing attack towards one of its talons, grabbing onto it with one hand as he drew Caliburn in the other. The Apollo attempted to shake Sonic off as it flew randomly throughout the large chamber, even attempting to ram its underbelly into a nearby wall, but Sonic had already leapt from it before it crashed and ran on the wall itself, running at an even faster speed to avoid falling off as he made his way around the chamber. He noticed the sizable dent made in the wall, and that's when an idea came to him. Hey, Kentucky Fried Chicken. The blue hedgehog called out to the Apollo, drawing its attention as he continued to round the walls. Is that all you got? As far as I can tell, you're just like any other Tweety I've taken out. That definitely angered the mutant, enough that it flapped its wings to send more of its flaming feathers his way, with Sonic making sure that he was at the wall where the Apollo had previously crashed in. He leapt from the wall just as the feathers made contact and exploded. Using the explosion to further propel him to the hovering mutant, Sonic had Caliburn drawn as he performed another homing attack, going straight for the joint of the right wing as he not only struck it, but also slashed it with his sword to dislodge the wing, almost completely severing it. As the Apollo roared in pain, Sonic plunged Caliburn into the back of its neck while wrapping his arm around the beast's head, making sure to steer it toward the wall that was further damaged by the mutant's ranged attack. It crashed in hard, and Sonic pulled Caliburn up, slicing up from the neck and the back of its head before performing a spin dash to further tear up the head and make sure it was totally obliterated before kicking off. The second he landed on the ground with his feet in one hand, the Apollo exploded in glorious and dramatic fashion. Unlike normal Grimm, these mutants explode when they die. Sonic said aloud as he turned around to see the large and gaping hole that led out of the chamber. Fill it up with something like fiery dust, and you got an even bigger bang. Thanks for the exit. With a smirk, the fastest thing alive leapt out the hole before running in the adjacent hallway outside to find the rest of his friends. RWBY used her speed to dodge past the gunfire from the androids that shot at her before zooming in to close the gap between three of them, where she quickly drew crescent rows and gave a downward slice to tear through the front of the one in the middle, and once the blade touched the ground, RWBY spun around on the pole of her weapon to deal double kicks to knock the other two down. Pyrrha had also closed the distance between herself and four robots, using her shield to block their gunfire before she lunged Milo to pierce the throat of one and swung to decapitate the other. Two tried to strike her with the blunt of their heavy-duty guns while a fourth put itself in a position to shoot at her, but Pyrrha was able to use her polarity to pull one of them in front of her to tank the fire while using a KO to block the blunt strike of the other robot and slid around while slicing at its legs with Milo before throwing it in its javelin form to take out the robot at a distance while bringing her shield down to decapitate the robot that was down. Pyrrha, behind you, she heard RWBY's voice warn her as she called her weapon back with polarity. Wait, Pyrrha, that's not me. The real RWBY warned her, but it was too late as a robot had already snuck up on her, which revealed itself as Mimic as he had drawn a knife to slash at her side. She tried to swing her sword at him, but he had ducked under the strike as he dealt a kick to her feet to trip her up before performing a flip kick to her jaw. Though Pyrrha was quick to recover, she lost sight of Mimic as he disappeared behind a group of four more androids that had advanced their way toward her. RWBY herself was surrounded by 6 robots as she shot with crescent rows in its rifle formation to take down one robot, prompting the other 5 to shoot at her. RWBY was forced to retreat with her petal burst, moving through the gap made by the robot she shot down. RWBY, take my hand. She heard Pyrrha and saw what appeared to be her reaching out toward her. Caught in the heat of the battle, RWBY had reached forward to grab her hand. Gotcha. Mimic sneered, still adopting Pyrrha's face, but revealing his true voice and eyes, much to RWBY's shock before he struck a knee to her gut and performed a roundhouse to her face to knock her back down. She tried to push herself back up, only to see Mimic was gone as 4 robots advanced on her and fired their weapons at her. As RWBY backed away, she felt she had backed into someone. Acting on instinct, RWBY swung crescent rows backwards, only to find it blocked by a certain shield as she had backed into Pyrrha, who brought Milo close to RWBY's throat. Their eyes widened at each other for a brief moment. Are you Pyrrha, or Mimic? RWBY questioned. But you. Pyrrha herself questioned at the same time. But that moment of hesitation proved to be the perfect opening for Mimic to rush in and deliver a double kick to RWBY's back and knock her into Pyrrha, knocking both girls down. Must be hard to fight while tripping over an unreliable partner. Mimic sneered as he went towards Pyrrha as she tried to get up. He kicked her in the back of the head to push her face down onto the floor. And all that moving metal's gotta be a strain on your powers, huh? While he seemed to have Pyrrha down, RWBY had recovered to swing crescent rows at him, but he ducked under the slice and moved in to slug her across the face before grabbing her by the shoulders and pushed her down while leaping over her to disappear behind a group of robots. The 2 huntresses in training pulled themselves up as they were surrounded once more. I see what he's doing. Pyrrha thought. RWBY and I aren't accustomed to working together, so we're uncoordinated, and he's taking full advantage of that, using his shapeshifting to trip us up. And all these metal robots are making it difficult to focus. I have to use my polarity to protect myself, but since he's metal, damn. RWBY, I think we're in trouble. Pyrrha said to her. Yeah, me too. The younger girl agreed as the robots opened fire on them once more. Amy swung the Pico Pico to parry the clawed strike from the mutant named Garm before rushing at its underbelly to perform a tornado hammer move to send it flying upwards to land flat on its back. While it was down, Amy jumped to land on its belly and struck her hammer multiple times at its face. However, Garm opened its mouth to blast a frosty breath attack. The force of it was enough to knock the pink hedgehog back. She had landed on her side and pushed herself up, looking towards her hammer to see that it was partially frosted over. She also saw Garm push itself back up to see the damage that had been previously dealt to it was now healing. Right, mutant healing, Amy muttered in frustration. And it has ice breath too. Garm slowly advanced itself toward her and Amy was soon backed against the wall, but that's when she got an idea. She couldn't beat this thing in such a compact space, it was time to get some air, and possibly some help. Hey Garm, over here. You wanna go for a walk? Amy whistled. Come on, let's go for a walk. Garm roared in response as it shot another frosty breath attack towards her, but Amy was able to roll out of the way and saw the wall was frozen over. When Garm moved in to try and get at Amy with its claws, she swung the Pico Pico to the side of its face to knock the beast into the frozen wall. She then proceeded to perform her own spindish attack, with the Pico Pico hung outward for extra power and pummeled her way through the side of Garm while he was still at the wall. Using all the strength she could muster, Amy smashed her way through Garm's body, and used Garm's own weight on the frozen and weakened wall, causing it to crack more and more until finally she had broken through the wall, as well as Garm's whole body. The two stumbled and rolled outside into the hallway. Now was not the time to rest, however. Amy turned to see Garm was weakly pulling itself up, despite having a huge chunk of its body, including its right arm, eviscerated by that attack. Deciding to finish the job, Amy rushed Garm before it could regenerate and struck the right side of its head, which appeared to be its vulnerable spot right now. The attack was enough to knock it down, where she went on to pound the Pico Pico repeatedly in that exact same spot until she bluntly broke off the head entirety. Amy had leapt back in time to avoid the resulting icy explosion upon Garm's destruction. Taking a deep breath, Amy fell to her knees in exhaustion. Normally I love dogs, but that was a bad boy. She joked mostly to herself as she allowed herself to catch her breath before she would pick herself back up to try and find everyone else. Shadow leapt from one conveyor belt to another as the Chimera climbed in pursuit, the 4 Beowulf tentacles serving as a means to climb throughout the assembly line and catch up with the fleeing black hedgehog. It tried to bring one of the Borbitusk tentacles down onto it, but Shadow retaliated with a Chaos Spear to knock it back before leaping up towards another belt. When the Chimera caught up to him, Shadow had drawn Arondite and dashed for one of the Beowulf tentacles that tried to strike at him, only for the ultimate life form to slice off said tentacle and land on the belt behind the monster. He glanced behind to see what would happen now. The Chimera itself appeared to have another tentacle regrown in the place of the one severed, only that one didn't have the body of another Grimm. When Shadow looked down to see the tentacle that had already been severed, the Beowulf attached to it still appeared to be alive, albeit it struggled to move with its lower body only being a severed tentacle. Teleporting straight down to the ground with the struggling beast, Shadow had used Arondite to decapitate that Beowulf before stepping back to watch it explode. Each appendage can function independent. Shadow glanced upwards to see the Chimera climb its way down toward him. This would be a challenge for most others, but not me. I can't afford to drag this out. Time to end it. The monster landed on the ground in front of him and had lashed out its 3 Beowulf tentacles, 2 Borbitusk tentacles, and conjoined Ursa tentacle for a combined attack. But Shadow had already drawn the green Chaos Emerald. Chaos Control. Time stopped as all 6 of the beastly tentacles were just about to bear down on him. Using his own superior speed, and the sword in hand, Shadow moved in to decapitate the Ursa and 3 Beowulfs. The Borbitusks seemed heavily armored, so Shadow wouldn't waste his limited time stop on them and decided to eliminate them and the Chimera's main body in one fell swoop. He leapt towards one of the conveyor belts that hung over the Chimera and threw 2 Chaos Spears towards each end to dislodge it before repeating the process with the belts above him, over and over. He had already dislodged 7 belts by the time he reached the top and time resumed its flow. The dislodged belts all fell down toward the ground and landed hard on the Chimera, pilling on top of it and slowly crushing it under the combined weight. Deciding to make sure it was down for good, Shadow performed a spindish as he shot himself straight downward and smashed into the pile of debris. When he slid to a stop, whatever was left of the Chimera had exploded behind him, signaling its defeat. Shadow briefly turned back to see the destruction he had left as he kicked a piece of debris. "What a waste of potential," he commented. But he was never the type to waste time himself either. Deciding to regroup with the others, Shadow threw another Chaos Spear at a wall to blast his way out before escaping. Tails flew up and around the floating blocks and bridges, being careful not to hit any of them. The flying monster known as the Hydra, on the other hand, wasn't so subtle. Its enormous and larger body was able to break through each obstacle with little effort, which gave the flying fox little sanctuary. The Hydra tried to close the gap with its lower white head that moved to snap at him, but Tails swerved out of the way but stopped flying to avoid the upper black head that snapped at him. Tails let himself fall to avoid the heads before spinning his tails again to resume his flight, with the monster once again giving chase. "I can't overpower that thing, I need a new plan of attack." Tails tried to think as he glanced back to see all four heads stretching forward to lash out and bite at him. Just one of those heads looked big enough to swallow him whole. "No, I can't waste any time. I gotta be smart about this." He flew all the way up towards the ceiling and kicked off it to charge at the Hydra. When it looked like all four of its heads were about to snap at him, Tails performed his own spin dash to zoom past all four heads and strike at the conjoined area where the necks met the body to disorient it. Tails flew around its enormous body and made his way straight towards the ground, where he remembered to park the invisible cyclone. Pulling out a remote, Tails quickly deactivated the hardlight dust shield that had it cloaked and protected and got in its seat to turn it on. Taking a brief look at the Miles Electric, he saw that its weapon systems were back online for the most part, save for the power laser. Using that thing again would damage the cyclone, and he can't afford to waste any power without knowing what else was lurking down here. Time to go. Tails fired a pair of gravity dust missiles at the wall in front of him. The resulting explosion and gravitational pulse were able to blow a hole into the wall. The Hydra roared as it made its way down toward him, but Tails had already converted the cyclone into its cart mode and drove out the hole just as the mutant monster landed. Making his way into the hallway on the other side, Tails heard the Hydra roaring on the other side. "Hate to leave that thing, but we might have a better chance taking it down as a group." He drove away into the hallway, leaving the roaring monster behind. Weiss dodged and ducked under the slice of the stolen Mertenaster that was currently being wielded by the mimic Beoid, who still had assumed the form of Jacques Schnee. He swiped his feet to trip her up and knock her to the ground, where he proceeded to lunge the blade at her, but she quickly erected a glyph to shield herself as she rolled along the floor to gain some distance. But the imposter Jacques swung Mertenaster to generate a wave of flames from the stored fire dust along the ground, which Weiss couldn't avoid and was blown back by the resulting explosion. Not a bad weapon. Mimic Jacques commented as he looked at the sword. "Might give it a few mods, but I think I'll keep it." The Schnee heiress pulled herself up and looked more than a little frustrated. She had never been in a fight without her weapon before, and it made it more difficult to use her semblance, as she had often used her sword as something of a controller to properly aim glyphs, so control in that regard was somewhat difficult. But even that wasn't the worst of it. No, it was the fact that this imposter had taken the form of her father. She knew that it really wasn't Jacques, but seeing his face and hearing his voice like this as he had her on the defensive was really getting to her. And judging by the smirk on his face, that was precisely Mimic's intent. "You seem to depend on your weapon too much," Mimic Jacques commented as he playfully tossed Mertenaster in his hands like a baseball. "I mean, with it you can handle your own pretty well. Without it," he waved his hand as a sign of mediocrity, "I could give you some pointers on hand-to-hand combat if you want." "I don't need or want any advice from you," Weiss exclaimed as she thrusted her hand to try and erect a glyph underneath him, but Mimic Jacques had seen that move coming and was already rushing her before she had a chance to counter as he swung Mertenaster at her again to knock her down. She tried to get back up for a punch, but he easily caught her by the wrist and pulled her into a knee to her stomach before spinning around to send her rolling across the ground. "What's wrong? Don't want any advice from dear old daddy?" he continued to taunt as he advanced his way towards her. "You're not my father," Weiss shouted. She tried to conjure another glyph with her hands, but he had already leapt into the air and landed on her, slamming his feet into her to kick her to the ground hard. He then pressed one foot on her throat as he loomed in with a sinister smile. "You're really not living up to your family name, little princess." Knuckles gave a yell while the Kong beast roared at him, both pounding their fists at one another as they each struck their face, sending both of them skidding back quite a bit a ways before they charged at one another again. As the Kong closed in, it raised its fists up high and tried to smash them on Knuckles, but he moved in close enough so that not only did the crushing blow miss him, Knuckles had jumped up to deliver a powerful uppercut to the mutant's jaw with enough force to haul it into the air. While airborne, Knuckles threw out another powerful punch to send it crashing to the ground hard. The Red Echidna landed on his feet to glare at where the beast had landed, but was caught off guard to see that the Kong had already quickly recovered and rushed Knuckles with such speed that he couldn't react in time to the mutant's shoulder striking him and sending him flying all the way to the metal wall. But the monster didn't stop there. It grabbed Knuckles with one hand and lifted him up with a roar before smashing him into the ground, where it then proceeded to pound him repeatedly with multiple strikes from its rocky armored fists, either one at a time, or even both. It would pound him repeatedly until he was nothing but a pile of mush. That is until when the Kong threw one fist forward, Knuckles was able to reach out and catch it with his own hand. Despite being pounded into the ground, and appearing stuck in an impression, he glared with intense ferocity as he pushed himself up to deliver a punch directly to the Kong's face. With the mutated Burial disoriented, Knuckles went on the offensive as he punched the monster with such speed that it seemed like his fists were a blur. He pounded so fast and so hard that the Kong was unable to counter, even as Knuckles pulled back both his fists and slammed them into the monster's armored belly to send it crashing all the way on the other side of the chamber, right into a stone wall and breaking it down, leaving a large hole that led deeper underground. Knuckles narrowed his eyes, keeping his fists up defensively as he saw the Kong recover. Though he seemed more focused on the cracks on its stone armor. That earth dust is pretty durable, but it's not indestructible. And now that I've figured that out, he drew his dual Galatine blades. It's time to end this. As much as I'd love to go a few more rounds with you, my mission and my friend's safety takes priority. The Kong roared as it charged at Knuckles once more, who charged at the mutated beast in return. But when he appeared close enough, Knuckles jumped straight forward with Galatine pointing outward before spinning his body around like a corkscrew and drilled into the armored belly of the Kong, specifically the one spot that was cracked. With all the strength and power he could muster, Knuckles was able to break through the stone armor and drill through the Kong's whole body, emerging out from its back. Hey, I've been digging holes all my life. Drilling through solid rock is child's play for me. Knuckles commented as he saw the Kong tumble down on its back. Now to make sure you stay down. He jumped into the air once again, coming straight over the Kong's face before performing another spinning drill attack with Galatine and dug into the monster's face. It didn't even take a few seconds before he completely obliterated its head. Once that was done, Knuckles spun and kicked himself off the ground to avoid the resulting explosion of green energy that also sent rock fragments in multiple directions. The Red Echidna dusted his shoulders. Now with that done, he noticed the large dent in the metal wall where the Kong had previously rammed him in. He repeated the same spinning drill attack on the already weakened metal wall. Though digging through metal was not the same as doing the same through earth, but Knuckles' own strength was enough to break through and given him a means to escape. Ren swung one storm flower at the throat of a nearby robot before wielding the other to shoot precise shots at the face of the second to take it down. Nora swung Monhild into the side and eviscerate one robot but was quickly blown back by two more heavy androids that fired their rockets at her feet. Ren was about to rush and assist his partner and friend, only to find what appeared to be Nora in front of him. Yes, the fake Nora, who was a mimic Beoid, smiled before punching Ren in the face. Though he quickly recovered and backflipped to gain some distance, he ended up backing into two heavy androids that tried to smash their weapons at him, but he ducked and swerved under their strikes right as he sliced the blades of storm flower into the joints of one of the robots to literally disarm it, only to find himself surrounded by 6 more as they all aimed their guns at him before firing. Nora had managed to pull herself up for the most part, but felt a hand grab her by the arm and was surprised by who she thought was Ren pulling her up. "That's a cute face you got. Let's see if we can fix that." He had punched her in the jawline. Seeing a backstabber-like mimic take the form of her oldest friend really did a number for her temper. Nora then swung Monhild at him, only for the mimic Ren to not only leap over the large hammer, but even grab it by the pole and spun himself around to slam both his feet into her face, sending her towards several more robots. Ren ran to dodge the gunfire of the many heavy androids shot at him as he quickly found cover behind a metal pillar, but it wouldn't keep him safe forever. He's trying to separate us, Ren thought, appearing to figure out the enemy's strategy. Mimic doesn't know us personally, but he probably figured out that Nora and I work best as a team, and he's attacking our teamwork. Isolating us while having these robots wear us down. We can't fight him like this, we need to fall back, maybe even regroup with the others. Just as the robots attempted to surround him as they came around the pillar, Ren jumped to land his right foot on the robot on his left and proceeded to run and jump on their faces before trying to get back to his partner. Nora, we have to get out of here, he called to her. Even if Mimic could replicate their voices, he had hoped that she would recognize the situation they were in and realize they needed to retreat. She did indeed hear him call, and as much as she hated the tactical retreat, she knew that's exactly what they needed. Heads up, I'm making things go boom. Nora converted Monhild into its grenade launcher form and fired directly at the ground below her, which not only blew away the robots that had surrounded her, but also sent her flying into the air, despite the damage it did to her aura. Ren saw her fly up and quickly fired the grappler of Storm Flower into a nearby vent on the wall, close to the ceiling, pulling him upwards and closer to the wall, which he ran on to catch up with Nora as she proceeded to fall before jumping toward her to catch her in his arms and land on his feet. The two quickly made a break for it now that they were away from the remaining androids. What was the name of the village where we met? Nora asked him, wanting to make sure it was the real Ren, even as they ran away. Kuroyuri, in Mistral. It's where I was born. Ren answered, seeing where Nora was going with this before asking a question of his own to be sure. When did I first use my semblance? When we were kids. The Grimm attacked your home and the two of us hid under a building and you held me close. Nora replied, your semblance activated, and we were able to hide from the Grimm. Ren nodded before he and Nora shared smiles as they turned one corner and ran into an adjacent hallway. The Mimic Bioid changed its appearance to resemble the original Mimic, scoffing in annoyance as he saw his enemy flee. Clever brats. He knew they'd be something of an X-factor given what limited information he had on them, but that didn't make them any less of a headache. He looked around him to see he still had 10 robots. After them, he ordered, prompting the robots to give chase with the Mimic Bioid running in the middle of the pack before shifting his form to resemble an android and blend in. I don't understand, what are you doing here? Blake asked Adam. I came to help. You were right, the White Fang is out of control. He answered. Eggman's basically taken over. They're taking orders from a human now. Blake seemed rather skeptical. You've seen what that maniac can do. The weapons at his disposal. Adam argued. They don't care if he's human, just that he gives them what they want, the means to conquer Remnant and instill Faunus supremacy. And that's exactly what you wanted. Blake shouted. How many people did you kill or let die just because they were human? I know humanity has treated us badly, but you're acting every bit as bad as them if not worse. You're right, Adam admitted. Blake had to double take, her widened eyes blinking twice, not sure if she heard that right. Did Adam just admit that she was right? I took things too far. Adam began, speaking in a sincere tone. I thought it was necessary, but all it did was stir the hornet's nest. That's what drew Eggman to us. Even if the White Fang are aiming for Faunus supremacy, we both know he's only using us. He'd sooner throw us to the Grimm than give us any sort of rule in his new world. Then why not try to stop him? Blake questioned. I did try, but he already turned the rest of the White Fang against me. He replied. I guess he was always planning on throwing me to curb. He gave a slight chuckle. I suppose I should be used to that by now. Adam, she looked in sympathy. I know I screwed up, not just with the White Fang, but with you too. Adam went on. I pushed you away. I don't have any excuses, but I am sorry. He offered his hand to her. Please, let me help you. We can stop Merlot right now and then, I'll turn myself in. Why you'd really do that? Blake asked in a surprised yet hopeful tone. Yes, I'll take responsibility and tell them everything I know. Maybe you and your new friends can use that to stop Eggman before things get out of control. I'll even tell you where they're hiding. He still kept his hand held out to her. Blake, I want to make things better. Really, I do. Blake saw the smile and felt that it was sincere. A part of her felt uncomfortable with this, but another part seemed hopeful that he really wanted to atone and set things right. And if her new friends were willing to give her a chance despite her own past, then maybe he deserved one too. She took his hand. Alright, but I'm not quite ready for that. I don't think I want to go back to that again. That's alright, Blake. Whatever you want. While his right hand was still clasped with hers, his left was out of her field of vision as he let a knife slip down into his palm. Something a certain pink hedgehog noticed as she rounded one corner of the hallway. Blake, watch out! Amy shouted in warning. The Faunus girl was caught off guard by Amy's warning, but nothing prepared her for Adam pulling her in close as he prepared to lunge his knife into her. Fortunately, Amy had sprinted forward with as much speed as she could to swing the pico at him, knocking him away before he even got a chance to hurt her. But the second her hammer struck, Adam's form changed to reveal that Adam Taurus was never really there, but Mimic in disguise. Or more specifically, a Mimic Bioid. That caused Blake's pupils to shrink as her face went pale. Cheap shot. He scowled. A taste of your own medicine, creep. Amy went on the attack, swinging the pico at him. He swerved to the left to avoid the hammer smash that left a sizable dent on the floor before rushing her to the side with his knife. Though she pulled back her head to avoid her face getting slashed, he kicked her feet to trip her up before stomping on her hand that held the pico forcing her to let it go. With her down, the Mimic Bioid had drawn his knife and was ready to cut her down. Only to get shot in the back repeatedly. The Mimic Bioid rolled off Amy, sparks coming out from the bullet holes in his back as he looked to see who had shot him. It was Blake, holding out Gamble Shroud in its gun configuration. Her face filled to the brim with pure ire and rage. Her eyes wide with fury as her teeth gnashed, her cat ears poked up high underneath her bow, and one could practically hear her growling if they listened closely enough. With a yell of fury, Blake was already on the Mimic Bioid as she stabbed it with the blade of her weapon and proceeded to stab over and over with no signs of stopping. Even when the holographic appearance of Mimic vanished, revealing the skeletal robot underneath that was no longer operable, Blake didn't stop. It wasn't until Amy gripped her arm firmly that she stopped, causing her to turn her look of feral rage towards her, where she saw a look of sympathy and concern. Blake, it's over. You got him. She spoke in a soothing and gentle tone. Hearing Amy speak like that, and seeing the look in her eyes seemed to calm Blake down slightly, but the look of anger was still there, along with her heavy breathing. Take a deep breath. It didn't seem like she was listening. Blake, I want you to take a deep breath. Inhale. Amy performed the action herself for demonstration. After a few seconds, Blake took a deep breath. Hold it in for about 3 seconds. Amy instructed and Blake did just that. Now exhale. Amy exhaled herself to show her, prompting Blake to let her breath out as well. Again. Breathe in. Blake inhaled once again. Now breathe out. Blake exhaled as Amy had told her. Again, in and hold for 3 seconds, then out. After that, it seemed Blake had calmed down for the most part. But as the anger vanished, there was only pain and grief in her eyes as she slowly stood up with Amy by her side. So, I'm guessing that was Adam, or that's what he looks like. Amy assumed. Yeah, Blake confirmed. Her fists clenched. He told him, she muttered, causing Amy to look in confusion. He told him things, about me, things I shared only with him, I trusted him, to keep them private, but he went in. She sounded like she was on the verge of crying. Amy couldn't help but look in sympathy towards Blake. Not only that, but she also felt a strong sense of anger as well. It seemed that Blake was once close with Adam, more so than how she previously described. She may not know exactly what their relationship was like, but she could take a guess. They were at least close enough to share personal and sensitive information. And yet, with Blake apparently left the White Fang, Adam must have told Mimic those things, all probably just to spite her. That thought alone really made her mad. But she pushed back her anger to focus more on the friend who needed her help right now. I won't ask for details, Amy began as she slowly and gently grasped Blake's hand to extend some comfort. But I can tell that he really hurt you, maybe even before you left. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. But if you do, I'm here. I'll listen to everything you have to say and I promise I won't judge you. Amy smiled. Because that's what a real friend would do. Blake slowly turned to face Amy with an emotional look on her face. She felt her eyes water, but she rubbed them out with her arm to try and calm herself down. We should find the others. Blake got back to what was at hand. We need to stop Merlot. Absolutely. Let's go. Amy was about to move ahead, but she still felt her hand being held, somewhat tighter than before, but not painful. She turned back to see Blake giving a smile as some emotions came back to the surface. Thank you, Amy. The pink hedgehog smiled back. Anytime. Oh, and for the record, if the real Adam ever gives you any more trouble, you just let me know. She gave an eager smirk as she held the Pico Pico up over her shoulder. I'll show him that hell hath no fury like an angry woman with a hammer. Blake had to push back a chuckle before nodding in appreciation. With that out of the way, the two friends then proceeded to run onward. Kira was literally backed against the wall as the remaining 8 androids continued to advance on her. She and RWBY had fought their hardest, but between Mimic constantly using hit and run attacks and assuming their respective forms to keep them confused, as well as the overwhelming force of the robots themselves, it seemed to be a losing battle. Kira had taxed herself with her semblance, which may have been Mimic's intent with all these robots, not to mention all the damage she sustained from the robots, and Mimic meant that her aura was dangerously low. But despite being cornered, the young huntress refused to give up. She held up Milo and Akoo as she looked determined to keep fighting, despite her exhaustion. Kira. RWBY was about to rush and help her, but Mimic appeared behind her to use his tentacles to bind her feet together and trip her up. While she was down, he was quick to snatch Crescent Rose from her with one hand while using the other to pin her arms against her back, while also having his tentacles wrap around her face and keep her from shouting. Remember what I said about heroes becoming martyrs, kid? Mimic taunted as he pulled RWBY's head up and brought the side blade of Crescent Rose close to her neck, all while forcing her to watch as Kira was about to be overwhelmed. This is the price you pay for having a hero complex. Suddenly, a trail of red energy had zipped past all the robots, before transforming into a black tornado to send them up in the air as a certain black hedgehog appeared above them had arrived before firing the gun that was built into his sword while also throwing out a chaos spear at all the airborne androids, catching them in an explosion that reduced them to scrap. Shadow. Kira looked with surprise and relief to see him as he landed on the ground, while Mimic was shocked by his sudden arrival. So much so that it left him open for Shadow to zoom at him with a punch that knocked him off RWBY. Right when it seemed like Shadow was about to advance further for another beatdown. Mimic had changed his shape once again, this time into the form of a young girl with blonde hair and dark blue eyes. You wouldn't hurt me, would you, Shadow? This caused the ultimate life form hesitated slightly at the sight of his first and oldest friend. But the imposter still held Crescent Rose behind them and was prepared to strike fast in that moment of hesitation. Only for that hesitation to turn into pure rage as Shadow swung his arm to throw several chaos spears at the imposter, sending Mimic flying and crashing against the ground, dropping the stolen scythe, as he turned back to his normal form. Why you'd attack your own friend? Mimic stuttered, not expecting his enemy to act so ruthlessly. Maria Robotnik is dead. That's a fact. Shadow growled lividly. And you have the gall to dare invoke her image. You must have a death wish. He was more than ready to rip Mimic to pieces, only for the shapeshifter to pull out a flash grenade from his robe and throw it to the ground. This caused a flash of light to blind not only Shadow, but the two students behind him. When the light faded, Mimic was gone without a trace. Damn it. Kira had managed to help RWBY to her feet. Are you alright, RWBY? Yeah, I'm okay. What about you? She asked. I'll be fine, Kira assured. Shadow, thank you. There was only a grunt of acknowledgement, but RWBY couldn't help but look with concern. She had seen Mimic take the form of that girl. She didn't look like anyone RWBY had seen before, and yet when Shadow saw her, he stopped for a second before going into a rage. Even if it was briefly, that anger was unlike anything she'd seen before, even more so than when Yang would lose her temper. Shadow, who is that girl? I think her name was Maria. No one you need to be concerned about. He replied, still keeping his back turned. Are you sure? I mean Mimic, RWBY tried. Drop it, Shadow said in a low growl. But RWBY stepped forward slightly. I said drop it. He turned towards her, flashing a fierce glare with his red eyes. The tone and look in his eyes was enough to startle RWBY as she stepped back in a fright. The second he saw the flash of fear in her eyes though, he tried to calm himself. Are the two of you still able to fight, or do you need time to recover? We'll be fine. Hira stepped forward, though she too was startled by Shadow's exclamation. She also decided to focus on the matter at hand. Our aura should recover soon, assuming we don't get involved in any large fights till then. Then stick close. We need to find the others as soon as possible. He instructed before walking off, with the two students trailing behind him. Though Ruby walked a bit of a distance away, looking down wondering if she did something to provoke Shadow. Hira happened to notice Ruby's distress as she went to pick up Crescent Rose, and decided to address it, speaking in a slight whisper so that Shadow wouldn't hear. Whatever the situation is between him and that person, it's clearly a sensitive subject for him. She told the younger girl. I know you probably didn't mean any harm, Ruby. But not everyone is so ready to confess their troubles to others. I didn't mean to upset him. Ruby muttered. I know. Hira confirmed. But we can't force any issues out into the open. It's best to just let him be. If he decides to talk to us on his own, that's fine. If not, then we need to respect that. Okay, Ruby seemed to accept that. Shadow couldn't tell what exactly they were saying, but he had a pretty good guess what they were whispering about it. He mentally reprimanded himself for directing his anger towards Ruby. She didn't know anything about that, and she did seem the curious type. Though he had long since accepted Maria's death, Mimic assuming her form wasn't what really angered him. The only way Mimic could have known about her was either that he had done extensive research, or Eggman had told him about her. That possibility is really what made Shadow angry. Despite the doctor's claims of trying to respect his grandfather, the idea that he would talk about Maria, his own cousin, in a way that would be of strategic advantage against his enemies, really makes him feel that Eggman doesn't respect his grandfather at all. If he did, he would have left the memory of Maria, someone that Gerald loved more than anything, alone out of respect. For Eggman's sake, that had better not be the case, or else Shadow will show no mercy the next time he sees him. John was thrown against the wall. He quickly pulled up his shield to block the strike from his own sword that his imposter stole from him, but Mimic John swiped his feet to knock the real one down. He tried to bring his sword down onto him, but the true John used his shield to block it again. Mimic John reached down to grab the real John by the hair and force him up before dealing a kick to his knee, bringing him down enough to leave him open for Mimic John to strike him in his open side with his own sword. I gotta admit, this is a good sword. Mimic John commented as he held Crocia Morse. Sucks though it's wasted with a novice like you. The real John growled as he tried to push himself up and held his shield, ready to fight back while his doppelganger looked more amused than anything else and rushed John, bringing sword to shield but swerved around it to grab John by the shoulder and spin him around to deliver a kick to his back and knock him face first to the ground, the shield bouncing out of his hands. It had been like this ever since the fight started. John couldn't land so much as a single hit on the mimic Beoid that had assumed his own form. The fact that he took his own image really seemed to make it all the more frustrating. When he tried to reach for his shield again, Mimic John stomped onto his hand, causing him to grunt in pain as he picked up the shield. You know, I have to say that I'm rather disappointed. Mimic John began. Your moves are amateur at best. You don't really have any fancy powers as far as I can see, otherwise you would have used it. And I don't think you're the genius type like that Fox kid either. So what's a loser like you even doing with these people anyway? None of your business, John groaned as his doppelganger stomped down harder on his hand. I'm thinking that if you hang out with strong people, you'll get stronger like them, right? Mimic John continued. Sorry kid, but that's not how the world works. Thought it makes me wonder why they even kept you on. Probably for some comedy relief to ease any tensions, because you clearly don't belong here. Can't handle yourself without your so-called friends watching your back. Like I'm gonna take advice from the guy who sold out his own team. John's response was interrupted as Mimic John kicked him in the jaw, causing him to roll over on his back. Mimic John then stepped down onto his chest with one foot to keep him pinned. At least I know how to handle myself. But can you say the same? I don't think so. Mimic John kicked him in the face twice. Even if you don't want it, I'm still gonna give it. Throw in the towel. These heroes got no need for a wimpy sidekick who can't even hold his own weapons. He held up the stolen Crocia Morse for emphasis. Hearing this freak speak with his own voice and say all those things brought up John's insecurities. It felt like that part of him that disagreed with everything he did since he cheated into Beacon. That nagging voice in the back of his head that told him that he didn't belong there. That he was only going to get himself killed. That everyone else was better off without him. And now, those same thoughts were coming back to the surface yet again as John couldn't even offer up a reply to the imposter that had him pinned down. "You've been fun to toy with, but I'm done with you now," Mimic John said as he aimed the stolen sword close to the real John's neck. "But not your shape. This should let me get close enough to pick off a few more of your friends. Don't worry, I'll tell them all you said hi." A blue blur struck the imposter in the side in the form of a homing attack that knocked the imposter off the genuine article. "Alright, tell me, hi," Sonic said before he dealt another homing attack as the Mimic Bioid turned back into its mimic form. He instinctively brought up the stolen shield to protect himself, but the blunt force still pushed him back. Sonic followed through by using his speed to zoom around and kick his enemy in the back before slicing at his hands with Caliburn to knock away the sword and shield of Crocia Morse before delivering a final homing attack to smash the Bioid into the wall, revealing that it was only a robot and nothing more. "So, he's got robot clones, huh? As if this guy wasn't enough of a pain," Sonic commented before walking over to John, who was on his knees. He offered him a hand with a smile. "You okay, man?" John offered no response and simply looked away. It seems that Mimic's words have had a clear effect on him. "Hey John, listen," Sonic began. "The thing about being a hero, is that you're gonna fight bad guys who are gonna try to get in your head, make you feel worthless or less than what you really are. Best to just ignore people like that." "But he's not wrong," John muttered. "I still don't have my semblance and, on my own, I'm nowhere near as good as you or anyone else. I'm not smart like Tails, or anything, am I really cut out to be a huntsman? Just because you can't break the sound barrier or lift a car or solve advanced calculus doesn't mean you're worthless." Sonic continued. "Maybe you're not the best fighter on your team, but everyone has their strengths as well as their weaknesses. You seem to be a good leader for your team. And even if you need some help fighting on your own, then work on that. Nobody starts off perfect, which only means we can get stronger. So, what do you say? Wanna get stronger? 'Cause I think you got what it takes." He offered his hand and a genuine smile once more. John looked Sonic in his eyes and could tell that he meant every word. Just as his doubts and insecurities were brought back to the surface, he once again thought about the words of Pyrrha, Tails, and even Shadow, reminded him of the lesson they all taught him in their own way. How it's alright to start off weak, so long as you want to make yourself stronger and are willing to seek out help for it. So, with a smile of his own, John accepted Sonic's hand as he was helped up, and quickly reclaimed Crocia Morse. "Let's go find our friends," the huntsman in training declared. "Took the words out of my mouth." Sonic grinned. Rouge practically danced around the electrical clawed strikes of the Callisto monster. She backed up to avoid one, and when it looked like the beast was about to advance and bite down on her, Rouge slid under its legs and appeared behind it to toss one of her purple hearts towards its back. Her heart-shaped boomerang returned to her hand just as she saw an electrical pulse emit from the mutant's body, with Rouge flying upwards to avoid the surge. "So, any contact triggers it, Rouge smirked. She focused her hearing for the sound of air coming into this specific room, and was able to locate the source, a small air vent that was built near the ceiling of the wall she was closest to. That was her way out, and she already had a means to escape. When the white bat landed gracefully in front of the wall, the Callisto turned towards her while she bowed mockingly. "Well, you gonna come and get me or what?" The mutant Ursa roared as it charged for Rouge, and right when it was about to get to her, she flexed her wings to shoot herself straight upright as the Callisto rammed into the wall, creating a sizable dent. The second it hit the wall, its electrical pulse exploded outward to further damage the wall. "I had wanted to do this more elegantly, but I suppose brute force works for a brute like you," Rouge said as she flew down to strike a double kick to back of the mutant's head to knock it into the wall again and set loose another electrical surge and weaken the wall even further. One more strike by throwing out purple hearts to slash at its back again and ignite another surge that ultimately broke the wall down. The Callisto fell flat on the floor of the hallway outside the testing chamber. It tried to pull itself up, only to feel something get stuffed into its jaw. "Thanks for the help," big guy. The lady appreciates it. Rouge taunted before casually walking away, leaving the heart-shaped bomb stuck in its mouth for a few more seconds before it exploded. The head was destroyed, and the rest of the mutant exploded afterwards in a flash of green and lightning behind the walking bat. Glad to see you're as ruthless as ever. Rouge turned to see Knuckles having just arrived himself. Ruthless with hints of style and class. She replied with her usual amount of confidence. So, where's everyone else? Can't find them. You're the first one I ran into. Knuckles said. But if we keep running around in circles like this, we're not gonna get anywhere. Then let's try and get Merlot and Mimic to play at our pace. Rouge gestured up to a nearby air vent. Think you're up for a bit of stealth, Knucklehead. The Taiju head of the Scorpio had lunged itself at Omega, which he caught using his metallic grip. He used his boosters with enough power to keep himself from being pushed back. But the Scorpio advanced further with its main body as its lower and larger pincers went to snap at him. Fortunately, Omega increased the power of his boosters to shoot straight up and above the mutated Grim. While airborne, Omega launched a volley of missiles that exploded all over its body. The former Badnik landed behind where the creature stood with the resulting smoke. Omega's optics were able to see through the smoke to see that the mutant Grim hybrid had already recovered and was prepared to attack again, prompting Omega to switch over to his dust rounds, firing a beam of lightning dust into the smoke and strike the side of the Beowulf body of the Scorpio. The monster roared as its Taiju head lunged at him once again, forcing Omega to halt his fire as he braced himself with his metal arms. The thrust of the lunge was enough to push the robot towards the wall where the Scorpio quickly advanced on him. Observation: each of the mutant's body parts appear to function independently. Omega noted as the Scorpio brought its lower pincers towards him again, with Omega grabbing and pushing against them with his hands. His own strength seemed enough to hold it back, but this left him open for the attached Beowulf and Taiju head to strike at him repeatedly, rendering him unable to defend himself. Standard methods of neutralization are ineffective. Solution: release an all-encompassing attack. Omega determined as he was repeatedly assaulted. Even his own titanium shell can only take so much damage. Rerouting all ice dust from munitions to exhaust. Igniting via outward surge of lightning dust. Commencing attack, now. Omega's arms opened to reveal their exhaust ports where all the ice dust had been redirected before he fired off the lightning dust from his hands in the form of another beam. This did blast through the head of the Taiju and even sever it completely from the tail, but that was only the start. The resulting use of electricity sparked into the stored ice dust within Omega's exhaust ports, which then unleashed an enormous cluster of ice spikes that shot out in various directions and piercing through most of the Scorpio's body. The force of the sudden burst was enough to send it upwards and crashed hard against the ground. Omega waved his arms to break off the ice that was stuck to him as he moved closer to inspect the damage done to his mutant enemy. The Taiju head was now deceased, its form already exploded. The rest of the Scorpio looked really worse for wear with most of its bone armor cracked open, and the Beowulf body appeared to have taken the worst of it as multiple large ice spikes had pierced through it, but it still appeared to be barely clinging to life. Something Omega solved as he grabbed the Beowulf's head and crushed it in his grip. All that was left was the main body of the Scorpio, the Deathstalker part. He grabbed it by the face and with his strength, he ripped it open to expose its insides before stuffing both his arms into it and igniting his flamethrowers at maximum power, courtesy of the fire dust he had. It didn't take long for the monster to be burnt alive from the inside out. Omega stepped backwards, detecting the imminent detonation of the mutant's body right as it exploded. Mutant target identified as Scorpio, completely destroyed. Omega declared. Omega. He heard his name being called and turned around to see Tails quickly drive towards him in the Cyclone's cart mode. I heard an explosion. I figured it was either you, Shadow, or even Yang. I have just terminated a mutant Grim unleashed by Dr. Merlot. Omega reported. Query: are you not suspicious that I am Mimic in disguise? Tails gave a slight scoff. You kidding? Only you would leave that much collateral damage. He gestured to hallway that had been torn up in the battle. What about me? How do you know I'm not Mimic? I have scanned you the moment you arrived. Your biometrics do not match his. Omega reported. Even if his shape is changed, he cannot change his internal biodata. Good to know. Tails replied. I didn't see any of the others on the way here though, we need to find them. Suggestion, hack into Merlot's network as you intended earlier. Omega suggested. We are deeper into his facility, direct contact with a power line should be sufficient for you. Yeah, great idea. Just need to find one. Tails said. Power line already located. Omega's scanners had already surveyed the walls, ceiling, and floor of the hallway. He turned towards a wall on his side before firing a single missile to blow a hole in the wall and expose a power line that ran vertically up the wall. It even sparked as it too had taken damage. Access granted. The damage to the power line should make it easier for you to tap into. Thanks. Tails smiled as he drove closer before stepping out with the Miles Electric. Can you keep me covered, just in case we get unwanted company? Request approved. Omega confirmed as he moved in to guard Tails, who got to work immediately. Possible suggestion for the future, build yourself a weapon. Your skills in combat combined with your tactical thinking are impressive, but you must also adapt to this new world we are in. Do not become too dependent on the cyclone as it can be destroyed. Tails thought for a moment and realized Omega was right. If he had a smaller weapon on hand, one he can easily carry, he might have thought of a way to take down that Hydra mutant that he had retreated from. You're right. I'll work on something when we get back to Beacon. But first things first, Tails acknowledged. Yang gave a roar of fury as she repeatedly tried to punch the mimic Bioid that continued to have the same appearance as her younger sister, but he easily dodged each of her blows before striking his own, such as a punch to the gut. Sloppy, predictable. Mimic Ruby chastised. When Yang tried to punch again, Mimic Ruby ducked under the punch and grabbed her by the arm, using her own momentum to haul her over and send her crashing to the wall, where he then proceeded to shoot her again with his gun, each hit landing and damaging her aura even further. Tell me, how does it feel being so utterly humiliated by your baby sister? Stop it, Yang growled as she tried to pick herself back up. Stop what? Mimic Ruby went on as he shot her again, this time in the gut, before advancing closer. Stop speaking the truth, he shot again. Stop wiping the floor with you. He got close enough that he rushed her to deliver a knee to her jaw before grabbing her by her hair. You haven't landed a single hit on me. Is it because of this pretty face? He caressed his own cheek. Can't bear to hurt you precious little sister. He continued to mock, which only made her angrier as her eyes were flashing a bright red. Ooh, scary eyes. He kicked her to the side of her face to knock her down once again. You don't seem all that scary to me. Yang's temper was reaching its limit. She wanted more than anything to rip this bastard to pieces. Every word he spoke to her, the fact she hadn't hit him even once, even using her own sister's voice and face just to spite her, that was already adding more fuel to the fire that was her repressed anger that had been building up since her sparring match with Knuckles, which she desperately tried to forget. The Mimic Bioid on the other hand had also managed to figure something out. This girl didn't even bother dodging most, if not all, his blows. From what he's seen, she was fast enough on her own that she could dodge them, or even use her own strength to at least try and block it, but no, she took the attack. Why? Was it because of whatever power she had? That must be it. Everything he's dealt to her is undoubtedly being used to fuel up some kind of surprise attack. He smirked, still adorning Ruby's face. You're building yourself up for some big attack, aren't you? That caused Yang to look up in genuine surprise, while Mimic Ruby shook his head with a laugh. Wow, you're such an amateur, you practically announced it to me when you were tanking all my hits. All that stuff is probably being stored up for one big super punch, right? Yang's eyes narrowed with a feral growl. Did you guys hear something? It came from further down the hall. Mimic Ruby heard those voices coming from the adjacent hallway. He stepped back a few feet into the intersection to glance around the corner and spot Ruby, Pyrrha, and Shadow. Though they didn't seem to notice him just yet as he quickly ducked his head back. Though there was still a chance Shadow might have seen him, but he might have a way to use that to his advantage. Well, come on then. Mimic Ruby challenged Yang. What? Show me your big attack. Mimic Ruby said, still bearing a taunting smirk. I mean, if it's anything like how you've been doing, it's probably no big deal. Unless you really can't find it in yourself to hurt little Ruby. He taunted. Are you really just that failure of a sister? He laughed. That was it. Yang's fury exploded as her hair lit on fire. She gave a mighty yell, one that drew the attention of the approaching group, particularly the real RWBY, as she recognized her sister's voice. Yang. RWBY zoomed forward with her semblance as fast as she could. RWBY, wait. Pyrrha tried to stop her, but she was already moving in. And just as she was, Yang had launched herself forward, pulling back a punch that channeled all the built-up energy she gathered from the hits Mimic dealt her, with the intent to smash the imposter's face in once and for all. The timing appeared to be perfect because just as Yang was about to strike, the Bioid had dropped RWBY's form and assumed Mimics as the real RWBY rounded around the corner. All time seemed to slow to a crawl as RWBY slowly craned her head to see not only Yang's look of fury, but also her fist being pulled back. That image caused RWBY to stop as her sliver eyes became so wide like saucers. Suddenly, Shadow had teleported in between them, pushed RWBY down with one hand, while grabbing Yang's punch by the wrist with the other and forced it to the ground. What came next was a powerful shockwave that not only blasted a hole in the metal floor, but even pushed everyone back, with RWBY being sent flying and crashing against the wall, Yang rolling backwards, and even Shadow sliding back on his feet slightly. Yang took a series of deep breaths as she tried to push herself up. She spotted RWBY against the wall across from her, and with her temper still raging despite all her stored-up power being spent, she rushed her with a yell, much to RWBY's shock. Only for Pyrrha to quickly come in and grab the blonde. Yang, stop. That's RWBY. Pyrrha told her as she put Yang in a Nelson hold. It's Mimic. Let me go. Yang struggled with a snarl. Mimic is behind you. That's the real RWBY. Pyrrha forced her to turn around to see that Shadow was already on the Mimic Bioid. Arondite was already drawn as Shadow slashed at his legs to keep him from running away. But he ended up cutting off the legs of not Mimic as he thought, but the robot that had assumed his form, evident by holographic form of the shapeshifter vanishing to reveal the metal skeletal frame underneath. The second she saw that, Yang's eyes widened in absolute shock. She turned her gaze as best as she could to see RWBY. Feeling that she's seen enough, Pyrrha had let her go, which allowed Yang to turn and see the real RWBY, who still looked in the same manner of shock as before. Yang then happened to glance behind her to see the large hole in the metallic floor that she had made. She almost did that to RWBY, the real RWBY, her own sister. All her anger vanished in an instant as Yang fell to her knees, the exhaustion taking hold, but that was nothing compared to the internal horror she had felt. Pyrrha couldn't help but look in sympathy, wondering what emotional turmoil Yang was going through. She turned to spot Shadow approaching them when she spotted the Bioid's remains behind him. How did you know that was a robot? I didn't, Shadow responded. Either Eggman or Merlot supplied him with these machines that can assume his form and his ability to shapeshift. Could the one RWBY and I have been fighting have also been a machine? Pyrrha wondered. And if so, how many more are there? I do not have an answer to either of those. But that could also mean the real Mimic isn't even here. Shadow scoffed in annoyance. He then spotted the down Yang as well as RWBY, who had picked herself up as she slowly made her way to her older sister. Yang. RWBY tried to get her attention, but she didn't respond. Yang. After another failed response, RWBY moved to her sister's side and kneeled down to nudge her by the shoulder. Yang, are you okay? She didn't respond. She couldn't even look at her own sister. The thought of what she almost did rendered her unable to think or even process anything. Get up. They heard Shadow's demand as he stepped forward. You were tricked, but there's no time to dwell on that. We have a job, and the only way to finish it is to move forward. Now on your feet. Shadow, she's not. RWBY tried to defend her but was quickly interrupted. Not what? Not ready. Do you believe Merlot or Mimic are going to sit by and just wait for her to recover? No, they won't. Shadow stated firmly. Either she gets up on her own, or I'll drag her to her feet. We won't leave anyone behind, but we don't need dead weight right now. She's not dead weight. No, RWBY, he's right. Yang tried to push herself back up, albeit shakily, which prompted RWBY and even Pyrrha to come to her sides and help her to stand. We have to focus. I'm alright. Yang, RWBY wanted to say something. What happened was, Pyrrha tried to find the right way to phrase it. It's something that we need to talk about, but now is neither the time nor place. For now, let us focus on finding everyone else so we can put an end to this madness. RWBY hated to admit it, but she knew deep down that they were right, even if she didn't like the way Shadow phrased it. Merlot and Mimic had to be stopped, and that came first. But that didn't mean she wasn't going to forget about this. When this mission was over, she was going to talk with Yang. And while she had every intent of consoling and helping her, it may also be time for her to have that talk with her that Knuckles had suggested back at Mountain Glen. "Let's go," Ruby said as the group of 5 made their way down the hallway, with Yang slightly dragging behind, though Ruby made the effort to stay by her side the entire time. Weiss gave a yell in pain as she was brought down by a slash from Mertenaster, still being wielded by Mimic Jacques. Despite having the appearance of her father, Mimic's own skills and speed far surpassed his own, so it was only natural that he'd be the better fighter. Weiss was hoisted up by the arm as Mimic Jacques repeatedly slashed her with her own blade, and kicked her at the same time, all while maintain a firm grip on her arm to keep her from running away. But it wasn't just Mimic's hold that kept Weiss from retreating or even fighting back. It was the way she was being beaten down repeatedly, and the face of who was doing it all brought up many harsh memories for her. All the times that her real father yelled at her, scolded her, and even struck her. All that came back in spades, even as Mimic Jacques thrusted Mertenaster at her to send her to the ground, her aura flickering, looking like it was about to shatter any second. She tried to push herself up, but as she saw the smirking imposter approaching her as he causally carried her own weapon over his shoulders, she almost thought it was really her father taking away her weapon and about to force her to come back to him. "Stop, please," she pleaded, tears in her eyes. No. I think I'd rather keep going." He kneeled down and yanked her up by the hair, causing her to scream. "This must bring back memories for you. Domestic abuse can leave quite the mark." He toyed with her hair with the tip of the blade when he noticed the scar down her eyes. "Did Daddy do that to you?" "Must have. How'd you like a few more?" He poked the blade on her cheek, causing her to whimper as she was ready to scream and cry. "Come on, little princess, why not scream for Daddy?" He raised the blade and brought it down toward her. Only for a blue blur to zoom in, and when the sword touched the ground, Weiss was no longer there. He turned to the side to see the glaring Sonic as he carried Weiss bridal style, whose eyes widened in surprise and awe at seeing him come to her rescue. John then charged in from the side with a yell to swing Crocea Morse at Mimic Jacques, who blocked it with Mertenaster before spinning the stolen sword that pushed John back. He was about to fight back, only for Sonic to zoom in and deliver a speedy kick to the back of his head, having set Weiss down, which sent him tumbling into John, who thrusted his sword to stab him. But just like their previous encounter, he only ran through a robot as the holographic covering flickered between Jacques and Mimic before disappearing as the robot went limp. But neither of them were concerned about that right now as they ran towards their friend. "Weiss, are you okay?" John asked. She appeared to be in a state of shock as she sat on the ground. While her heart was telling her that it was over and she was safe, her mind was still racing, not quite over what had been happening to her. What was probably only a few minutes between her and the imposter felt like an eternity. It wasn't until Sonic kneeled to her level and placed a gentle yet firm grip on her shoulder that her attention was drawn to him. "Weiss, it's over," he said in a serious yet understanding tone. The second she saw those free-spirited and compassionate green eyes, she leapt at him in a hug. Her eyes watered as tears flowed down her face, clinging to Sonic as if she was afraid to let him go or he might vanish. Or she herself would be taken away. As she continued to sob, Sonic's look softened as he patted her on the back with one hand and let her get it all out. A part of John wanted to hug her too, but he felt that may have been too much right now, but he still wanted to give what comfort he could. So he kneeled closer to Weiss, level as well, and put a hand on her shoulder. He and Sonic made eye contact as he gave a single nod. "Please, don't let me go," Weiss sobbed. "I don't want to go back to him, I want to stay with you, please." Sonic had a good idea of who she was talking about, and it wasn't Mimic. "Sure thing," he consoled with a smile. "You don't have to go anywhere. Stay with us as long as you want. And if he tries anything, he's gonna have to get past me first, and we all know that's impossible." Despite still crying, Weiss couldn't help but laugh. Meanwhile, Dr. Merlot sat in what appeared to be an observatory room as multiple holographic screens hung above the control console in front of him to show what has been happening in his facility. He had seen all the fights with Sonic and his companions against his specially made experiments, as well as the students' encounters with Mimic and his robots. "A shame, I put so much effort into those mutants," Merlot mused. They could have at least gone on a bit more. Though I will give them credit for using my creation's abilities to their own advantage, and at least the Hydra still lives. And Mimic, yesh, who knew he could be so ruthless? I heard he could play mind games, and his opponents were children, but still, very impressive. It's little wonder Dr. Eggman hired him. But, it seems I've lost track of the echidna and the bat, and, I can't seem to find young Mr. Prower and that robot. Most peculiar. His musings were cut off by a small sound of something metal dropping to the floor behind him, causing him to turn around where he had seen the cover for a nearby air vent having just fallen on the floor. Before he knew it, a red, single-edged sword was brought up to his neck. Turn around and you're dead. Someone threatened him from behind. This was the same masked woman that had snuck into his facility and followed the heroes here, in the form of a bird. Oh my, it seems I've overlooked a guest. Merlot raised his hands to show his cooperation. How were you able to sneak into my facility? I don't remember seeing anyone else besides those students in Sonic's group. Shut it down. I beg your pardon, Merlot requested. This whole place. Your mutants, your robots, shut it all down. The woman demanded as she brought her blade closer to his throat. I won't say it again. I can deactivate my facility and my androids, but not my Grim. Merlot replied. They are not machines. And even if I do shut down everything, that will only set loose all my mutants. You must at least care for the safety of the students and Sonic's friends, so would you risk I let loose all my creations? Because I guarantee there is at least one left, one that is my most powerful of all. Believe me, you do not want that one free. Then kill them. The woman insisted. Someone as smart as you has to have some kind of failsafe, just in case, right? So, kill the mutants, then shut it all down. Indeed, I have a failsafe, so if you would allow me, I'm not currently in a position to utilize it. Merlot requested. The blade was slowly moved away from his neck, but the woman grabbed him by the back of his head so that he couldn't turn around to see her and forced him to the console. He then began to type away. A specific failsafe, Merlot went on before pressing a single button that opened a door behind him. One to deal with intruders that happened to enter my observatory chamber. Suddenly, a large tentacle was shot out of the door and quickly ensnared the woman, catching her by surprise as she was pulled out of the room and into a much larger one. This was a cylindrical room with a ceiling over 100 feet over the floor, and a large cylinder in the center that acted something of a pillar. But the masked woman wasn't focused on any of that. Instead, she was focused on the tentacled mutant Grim that was clinging to the wall above the door that had just sealed itself shut. I had a spare mutant Kraken just for such an occasion. Merlot's voice relayed through the speakers. It's not quite a hybrid like many of my other mutants, but its unique mutation should make it quite the challenge for you, my dear. Please do enjoy yourself. The woman cursed herself for not thinking about this sooner. But now, she had no choice but to fight this monster. She held her sword firmly before the mutant Kraken shot more of its tentacles at her. Merlot chuckled as he saw the ensuing fight between the unknown intruder and the mutant Kraken before turning his attention to his other guests. As I said, in addition to my other mutants that I have stored here, there is one specific mutant I have yet to unleash. My most powerful creation. Merlot brought up a holographic screen of a darkened chamber that was probably at the very bottom of his facility where he saw 6 pairs of glowing green eyes. And I'm looking forward to letting it loose. Final examination and extermination. A group of about a dozen heavy androids kept up their pursuit of Ren and Nora, firing their heavy guns at the pair as they tried to keep their distance from the round of explosions that erupted at the ground behind them, blasting them both back. Ren was quick to recover and pull Nora around the corner for cover before he returned fire with Stormflower. He fired precise shots at the head of one robot to disable it, but the others resumed their fire, forcing him to take cover and avoid the deadly blasts. We're not getting anywhere like this, Ren stated. I'll go in from above and break them up. You take the stragglers, Nora told him. Wait, Nora. Mimics still, Ren didn't get a chance to warn her as Nora had already slammed Monhild down onto the ground to launch herself up and above the robots. While airborne, she raised her mallet with the intent to smash them all. Only for one robot to actually leap up into the air and meet her, grabbing the hammer, before said robot changed its shape to reveal Mimic, much to Nora's surprise before he kicked her in the face and chest, forcing her to let go of Monhild as they landed behind the robots. Nora. Ren tried to run and assist her, but the 9 remaining heavy androids converged their fire on Ren, forcing him to backflip and avoid their shots. As she pulled herself up, she looked in surprise to see Mimic taking her own form and standing in front of her downed Monhild. Which one of us is the real deal? I am. Only I can pull off my own face. Nora proclaimed as she stood up and tried to rush him with a punch, only for Mimic Nora to deflect her strike with a chop to the arm and deliver a kick to the side of her leg to bring her down before performing a roundhouse to her face and knock her back down. Not too good without your fancy mallet, are you? And would he be able to tell the difference? Mimic Nora taunted, referring to Ren as he continued to dodge the gunfire from the robots that kept them apart. You don't know us, Nora told him as she pushed herself back up. He knows me, and I know him. She tried to punch him again, but he ducked and swept her feet to knock her over and then proceeded to kick her in the stomach while she was down. True. Like I said before, you two are kinda X-Factors. Mimic Nora admitted. But you do know each other, so maybe your pretty little face might let me get close enough to finish him off. Maybe even hesitate a little bit. He continued to stomp relentlessly on her. I mean, who really would know? Suddenly, Mimic Nora was struck in the back by a rapid slash, causing him to falter over as he reverted back to his real form. He and the real Nora looked in surprise to see who it was holding her bladed weapon out. I would. Blake glared before rushing to slice Gamble's shroud repeatedly, which Mimic desperately tried to dodge. Though he was able to use his tentacles to snag her wrists together, allowing him to grab her by the throat, this also gave Nora the opportunity to retrieve Monhild and strike him in the side to knock him off. Let's see how you like an unfair fight. The hammer-wielding girl stated as she and Blake proceeded to double-team him. Ren had brought the blade of one storm flower into the throat of one android to disable it, but when the other 8 were about to open fire on him, he was forced to use the android in front of him as a shield to block their blasts. Though the robot was quickly blown to pieces and the resulting explosion blasted him back to the wall. He groaned as he glanced up to see all 8 robots closing in on him, ready to unload their heavy artillery and obliterate him right then and there. Only for a dash of pink to rush in and send all 8 of them flying up before a tornado-like strike caught them all and sent them crashing to the wall on the other side of the hallway. Need a hand? Amy smiled as she offered Ren her hand, which he took with an appreciative smile. Before the robots had a chance to recover, Amy and Ren were already on them. The former smashed her Pico into the body of one robot before swiping to knock off the head of a second. 2 had already gotten up around her, but she spun the Pico outward with enough speed to smash them to pieces. At the same time, Ren had jammed the blade of one storm flower into the back of one robot's neck before firing in the face of a second with his other weapon to disable it. When a third was up, Ren ran to deliver a spinning kick into it to knock it into the fourth, where he proceeded to gun them both down with his weapons. Mimic tried to dodge Nora's mighty hammer swings, but this caused him to back into Blake as she tried to slash him with Gamble's shroud. But when he leapt up and over her, Blake had used her semblance to quickly close the gap between them and slash at his sides to knock him to the ground. However, when she noticed the energy sparks at his injuries where blood should be, she realized it was another Bioid like the one she encountered, which only caused her to grunt in frustration. He's just a robot. Blow him up, Blake told Nora. With extreme pleasure. She grinned as she converted Monhild into its grenade launcher mode and opened fire to blast the Bioid to smithereens in glorious fashion. So Mimic was a robot the whole time. No, that wasn't the real Mimic. I met one earlier. Blake answered. Nora noticed the glare in Blake's eyes, causing her to look with concern. Blake, are you okay? I'm fine, she dismissed, but Nora could see through that. Contrary to what most people think, Nora can be quite perceptive of others and could tell that Blake was angry. No doubt that Mimic had got inside her head and managed to hurt her. Nora then put a hand on Blake's shoulder and offered a smile. Let's go find the real one and smash him into calamari. You love seafood, right? Blake stifled a chuckle at Nora's joke and attempt to cheer her up. Calamari is squid and I prefer fish but thanks. Good to see you too. Ren said as he and Amy met up with them. Any word on the others? No. Amy shook her head. Can't call em either. Guess we got no choice but to search this place ourselves. This is a freaking maze. How are we supposed to find anyone? Nora questioned. The old-fashioned way, I guess. Not like we have a choice. Blake replied. Let's go. Amy took lead as the group of four quickly ran further down the hallway. Meanwhile, the group that consisted of Shadow, RWBY, Young, and Kira proceeded further into the facility. So far they had yet to run into any opposition, but that didn't mean they shouldn't be careful. Shadow was currently on point, with RWBY in the middle. Young however lagged behind, closer to Kira. The red-haired girl was covering their rear, but at the same time, she was making sure that Young stuck with them with how slow she had been moving lately, though she had a good idea why the blonde huntress in training was in a dour mood. As RWBY hung in the middle, she felt she was in an incredibly awkward position. Up ahead of her was Shadow, whom had yet to say anything to her. She always had an idea that Shadow was the professional type, not exactly making small talk like how Sonic would, and took things very seriously. However, ever since Mimic had taken the form of that one girl, causing Shadow to snap in anger, RWBY wanted to keep her distance and not provoke any more anger that she felt he might be feeling. But at the same time, Young herself hadn't said a single word either, and while she couldn't exactly read Shadow, RWBY knew her own sister to have a good idea what was going through her head. RWBY made eye contact with Kira, looking toward the older girl with a gesture to switch places, something Kira understood as she nodded and proceeded to move into the middle where RWBY was while she moved closer to her sister. RWBY could tell that Young noticed her presence, but she only looked away, not even greeting her. Young, RWBY spoke softly. We need to talk. About what? The blonde muttered. About what happened back there. RWBY said. Then talk, go ahead and tell me how I screwed up. Young said. That's not. RWBY tried to say something, but Young wasn't done. Tell me how I let my temper get the better of me. Tell me how Knuckles was right all along and I've been using my crappy semblance as a crutch my whole life. Tell me how it was all going to blow up in my face sooner or later. Tell me how I almost got you killed, again. Young raised her voice, causing the group to stop as Kira looked towards in sympathy Young as she continued to break down, while Shadow just paid a slight glance. Just like before, I was stupid. You almost died because of me, and I. Young fell to her knees as she clutched her head in despair, tears of frustration and grief were already falling down. I almost killed my sister again. Why does this always happen? Am I just a jinx? Is that why she left? Is that why they both left? Young, RWBY wanted more than anything to comfort and hug her sister, seeing her break down like this honestly made her own heart break. But before she could do anything, you made a mistake. All eyes turned to Shadow as the black hedgehog walked towards them, Young slowly glancing up to see the serious expression in his eyes. But despite that look, there didn't appear to be any criticism or disappointment there. No one is immune to mistakes, no matter how strong they are. Shadow told her, you are correct in that your anger got the better of you and Mimic took full advantage of that. There is no getting around what happened. The past can't be changed but is still the past, and you have a choice now. You can choose to stay in the past and let your mistakes define you, or you can learn from it and use it to make yourself stronger. If you need a focus for right now, channel that anger and frustration you feel now into stopping Merlot and Mimic because right now, that's what matters. Everything else can wait. As Young let all of Shadow's words sink in, she couldn't help but think back to what Knuckles and Sonic had said to before. You're part of a team, you have to get better. And I know that accepting that kind of help isn't easy, so, take your time and at least think on it. But, hey, at least you're not alone in this. And when you feel you're ready to ask for help, all you have to do is just that. Ask, and I'll be right here. All her grief and self-anger was still there, but she could still put it away for now and channel it into stopping this insanity. But more importantly, this gave her something of a clarity that she really needed, and she knew what she needed to do once this was all over. Taking a deep breath to calm herself and keep all her grief back for the moment, Young slowly stood up. Alright, let's do it. Shadow nodded in approval. At the same time, while RWBY seemed happy that Young was at least putting this all to the side, she had listened to what Shadow said and it reminded her of the talk she herself had with Knuckles at Mountain Glen. Hey Young, RWBY got her sister's attention. When this is all over, let's talk. Okay. Young nodded. And Shadow, RWBY spoke to him now. About before, I'm sorry. No. He raised his hand to stop her. You didn't know what was going on and I should not have directed my anger at you. Well, it's still your business and I'll respect it, even if you don't want to talk about it. But if you do, I would be willing to listen. RWBY offered. Once again, Shadow nodded in understanding. Pyrrha smiled at how better things seemed to be getting with their own group and then got back to the matter at hand now that they were better focused. So, what is the plan, now? Pyrrha asked. We still can't establish contact and I don't think it's a good idea to split up given that Mimic is lurking around, and we don't know what else Merlot has in store. We have no choice but to move as we are. Shadow replied. All we can do is hope that someone is able to establish contact or that we run into the others. Given our current situation, there aren't any other options. Then that's what we'll do. RWBY said. Like you said, it's our only option. But knowing Sonic and everyone else, I think they're alright. Yeah, let's just find Merlot and Mimic so we can beat the crap out of them. Yang pounded her fist into her palm. Meanwhile, Sonic, Weiss, and John had rounded one corner to come towards a near-identical hallway to the one they had just exited. Why the heck does this place have to be so big? John questioned. Seriously, there's only 2 people here. He doesn't need a freaking maze. Sonic, maybe you should speed on ahead. With Mimic still out there. Not to mention probably more Mutant Grimm. We're better off sticking together and trying to regroup. Sonic replied. He normally would be able to comb this place with his speed with little issue. But given there is a dangerous and manipulative shapeshifter on the loose, they need to stick together if they have any chance of making it out in one piece. Ever since they rescued her, Weiss hadn't really said much of anything to them after calming down. But she wanted to say something. She wanted to thank them, both of them. But was now a good time. In enemy territory with a possible ambush around every corner. The logical and pragmatic part of her told her to simply wait till they were done before thanking them. But ever since she had come to meet RWBY, Sonic, and everyone else, another part of her that she didn't know was there had slowly began to speak out. A part that wanted to be more like the amazing people that she's met. And it's only gotten louder. She knew that RWBY and Sonic were usually the types to say what they want whenever they wanted to, though Weiss wished RWBY had something of a filter. And given that the coast seemed clear for the moment, now seemed like a pretty good chance to say anything. It's not like Sonic would scold her for speaking out like how her father would. Listen, Weiss got Sonic and John's attention, though she hesitated for a brief second, she kept speaking. This may not be the appropriate time but, I wanted to thank you. For helping me back there. Sonic smiled. No problem. It's what I do. But, still, thank you, and, it's not just for that. Weiss continued. I realize I may have said this before, but thank you for being here for me. I know I might not be the easiest person to get along with and yet, you still managed to put up with me. So, thank you, for everything, Sonic. The blue hedgehog could tell that despite her struggling to get some of these words out, that she was speaking sincerely. Given what he heard about her dad before, and what he just saw when that mimic android was tormenting her, it was clear that Weiss had a hard time growing up. But the fact that she was acknowledging her flaws and trying to improve herself shows that she's really starting to come around. She wants to come around. To Sonic, that always went a long way in his book. He gave a genuine smile when he responded to her. Hey, it's what friends do. Oh, and for the record, if you feel like you ever wanna say something, go ahead and say it. Freedom of speech and all that. That's a thing here on Remnant too, right? He snuck in a joke. Weiss gave a slight giggle before turning to the other person in their company. John, you too. Thank you for helping me. John was actually caught off guard by that. Did Weiss Schnee actually thank him? She spoke to him directly and thanked him. Well, of course even if she didn't thank him, he would still jump in to help her in a heartbeat if she ever was in trouble. But to hear her actually say the words, thank you, to him and mean it was quite a surprise. But it was a good surprise. Chuckling somewhat nervously he offered her his hand. So, friends. Weiss maintained her smile as she clasped her in with his own. Friends. This allowed a happy smile to form on his face. But just friends. Don't get any funny ideas. Don't worry. I wasn't doing anything just, you know. John sputtered and as he did, Weiss gave Sonic a half grin that seemed to match his own, earning a laugh from the blue hedgehog. Sonic, are you there? The group was taken by surprise by the sound of Tails' voice coming from Sonic's personal scroll, which he was quick to answer. Tails. Wait, make sure that's actually Tails and not Mimic using his voice. Weiss urged. Sonic nodded before speaking into the scroll. How did we first meet? Back when a couple other foxes were picking on me for having two tails, you came by and rescued me. Then Eggman attacked the island where I was living and I followed you, mostly because I've been following you since I've heard about you, and I wanted to be a hero like you. That was all Sonic needed to know this was his best friend. Thanks, sorry to doubt you. I get it, we're fighting an evil shapeshifter, gotta be careful. Tails responded as he remained in the same spot as before, using the Miles Electric to patch directly into the power line that Omega had provided for him, the former Badnik still guarding him in the parked Cyclone. I got Weiss and John with me. What about you? Just Omega, but I'm tracking the others right now. Tails said as the screen on his device showed the locations of the scrolls of all their allies. Looks like Shadows with Ruby, Yang, and Pyrrha, Amy's met up with Blake, Nora, and Ren, and Knuckles and Rouge are together. Can you see if there's place where we can all meet up, maybe call Ozpin for a ride just in case we need an emergency out? Sonic asked. I'm already on it. With Tails patched directly into the power line, it gave him the means to hack directly into Merlot's own communication network. It looked like there was a communication between here and Beacon, probably Merlot calling up Ozpin to mock him or something. But now, Tails had access to that same link. Hello, Professor Ozpin, are you there? Tails, I read you. The professor responded on the other line, much to Tails' relief. Good. Man, am I glad to hear from you, Professor. The young fox said. I feel the same. Where is everyone? Kinda scattered, but we're regrouping. Tails responded. I'm sending you our coordinates, do you think you can have a ship sent over here? I just received your location. Fortunately, this facility doesn't seem to be all that far from the mainland. Ozpin responded. I'll have a ship sent immediately, it should be there within an hour or so. Good. I'll let everyone else know. We'll try and do what we can here to stop Merlot. Tails answered before signing off and looking again at the data on his tablet. Sonic, I think I found a place where we can all meet up, I'm sending you and everyone else the data. Got it. See you soon, buddy. Sonic said as Tails sent all the data and pulled his device out from the power line. Let's go. Tails told Omega as he got back in the Cyclone's cockpit. Since you patched directly into Merlot's main communication line to contact everyone, it is likely to assume that Merlot himself may have heard and will direct all his forces to intercept us at the destination you have relayed. Omega noted. Yeah, I kinda figured. Tails admitted. But on the bright side, if we're all together we got a better chance. And you get to blow up more bad guys too, so that's a bonus for you. Affirmative. Omega responded eagerly as he readied his weapons. With that, Tails drove the Cyclone in its kart mode down the hall, with Omega following him, the last of the E-Series using his boosters to keep up. It would seem that Omega's assertions were indeed correct. Merlot had sat in his personal control booth, having heard everything when Tails hacked into his communications. He had to admit that he was rather impressed with the young fox's capabilities. Truly an intelligent mind. Still though, Merlot not only heard everything, he knew exactly where many of his young adversaries were appearing. With that, he contacted his ally. Mimic, it seems your bioids are destroyed, along most of my androids and experiments. Merlot said. Great. So, you got anything particularly helpful for me? The mercenary questioned irritably on the other line. Yes. It appears that they're all converging on the lower testing grounds within my facility. Merlot replied. If you would be so kind as to be there when they arrive. I have a little trap planned for them. Right, like all your other traps haven't been successful up to this point. Mimic pointed out. No need to be rude. If you wish to survive and possibly escape, please proceed there. Merlot instructed. Fine. Mimic groaned before signing off. Now then, while they get ready, let us see how our other guest is handling. The mad scientist mused to himself as he looked towards a screen that showed the fight that was taking place in the chamber directly behind him. The masked woman had drawn her red sword, and dashed at the mutant Kraken, using her sword to cut through all the tentacles that were shot at her, with each severed tentacle burning from the slice. When she got to the central pillar that the beast was currently attached to, the mutant lashed out all its remaining tentacles at her, but she was far too quick as she spun and sliced with such precision and speed that all the tentacles were severed quickly. The woman then leapt up and gave a straight vertical slice up the mutant kraken's face with the intent to slice it completely. However, her eyes widened in shock beneath her mask as she saw not only the wound she just inflicted heal almost instantly, but all the tentacles that she had severed were regenerated just as quickly. All the tentacles shot directly at her, forcing her to bring her blade up and block it. The blade itself shattered upon contact from the blunt force and then exploded from the fire dust that it was made of. The force of the blast pushed the woman back to where she slammed into the wall, but she landed on her feet upon recovery and looked to see the tentacles that had been damaged from that explosion were already healed. Damn it! She cursed to herself as she brought the hilt of her seemingly broken sword towards her scabbard and drew a blue blade this time. When the tentacles stretched forward and lashed out to her again, she sliced them all to beat the frontmost back before driving the blade down into the ground to create a large wall of ice spikes to block the onslaught as she quickly ran around. This whole thing turned out into an even bigger mess than she had planned. Though the enemy didn't see her face and was unaware of her identity, he was still aware of her presence. She needed to get to him and possibly silence him, depending on how in deep Merlot was with this whole thing. Of course, this mutant was particularly annoying with its regeneration. If she stopped holding back, she could destroy it. But she couldn't risk exposing her trump card unless she had no choice. And she couldn't escape without drawing the attention of the children or their alien friends. Yeah, this was going to be quite the problem for her, and that only made it more irritating. She had no choice but to kill this abomination with the weapon she had on hand and do it quickly. The masked woman rushed the mutant kraken once more, and just like last time, she used her ice blade to slice and freeze all the tentacles that were lashed at her. When she made it to the pillar, she leapt up and drove her blade directly in between the mutant kraken's eyes in an attempt to freeze it from the inside out. But the process wasn't quick enough as one of the monster's tentacles had already regenerated and lashed out to wrap around her waist and pull her back and away. The mutant thrashed its body to break off the frozen parts before all its wounds regenerated, much to the woman's frustration. Mimic had arrived at the location that Merlot had instructed him to go to. The testing grounds that resided in the lower area of the facility, and it was a rather enormous chamber, so much so that one could fit a whole army in there. But it was too spacious, there were no places for him to hide or find cover. Why would Merlot tell him to go here? Suddenly, a large door on the side had been broken down. Turning around, Mimic looked in surprise to see it was Shadow with RWBY, Yang, and Kira right behind him. And it wasn't just them. Sonic, Weiss, and John had exited out of a large tunnel on the other side of the chamber, with Ren, Nora, Amy, and Blake exiting out of a tunnel on the left side, with Tails in his Cyclone and Omega emerging out of one on the right. "Hey guys! Over here!" RWBY called out to everyone. Mimic at first tried to make a break for it to a nearby exhaust port, only for Shadow to teleport directly in his path and slug him in the face and knock him back to the center of the testing grounds. The shapeshifter looked up to see that he was surrounded on all sides by the heroes, all of whom were glaring down hard at him, especially Weiss, Blake, and Yang. The latter already had her eyes burning red. "Is it the real one?" Weiss questioned. Omega performed a brief scan. "Affirmative." "Good. Let's see if he breaks just as easily as those robots." Nora cracked her knuckles. Doc, a little help here." Mimic muttered into his comms. "Welcome to the testing grounds, young heroes." Merlot's face appeared on a large screen near the ceiling, drawing all their attention, while Shadow was quick to grab Mimic by his head to make sure he didn't slip away. Weren't we already in your testing grounds?" Sonic questioned. "Overcompensate much?" He gestured to the large room they were all in. "How many of these things do you need?" "It all really depends on a great many things, such as what you are studying specifically." Merlot explained. "Those chambers you and your friends were all in were designed specifically for you and the Grimm I created for those situations. These grounds are where I generally test all my mutants, pitting them against my robots to test their abilities, and it makes quite the entertaining show. And let me guess, you got one more Super Grimm to whip out on us, right?" Sonic assumed. Merlot laughed. "One of your friends referred to my facility as a maze. I have said before how I've taken some inspiration from myths of your world, are you by any chance familiar with the myth of the labyrinth? Oh boy, Tails winced. Tails? Amy asked with worry. Basically, it's a story of a hero who enters a maze and finds a Minotaur guardian at the center of it. Tails sums up. A Minotaur is a monster with the body of a human and the head of a bull. That's pretty messed up, Yang commented. Any more messed up than the creatures of Grimm? Tails replied. Touché, Nora admitted. Let me guess, you got a giant Minotaur Grimm to sick on us, right? Sonic guessed. Not exactly, Merlot answered. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to split apart, forcing the heroes to step and split into two to avoid falling in the opening below. Sonic, Ruby, Tails, Omega, John, and Kira were on one side, with Weiss, Blake, Young, Nora, Ren, Amy, and Shadow still holding onto Mimic on the other. As the ground continued open, something large slowly began to ascend from the platform beneath. It was a mutated Goliath. One that was even larger than those seen on the outskirts of Mountain Glen. Just like the other mutants, its eyes were glowing green as it had glowing green spikes along its back, including its tusks. But what stuck out the most was that this Goliath had 3 heads to it. And each of those heads had glowing tusks on each head. It easily dwarfed any and all mutants they have faced before. It let loose a powerful roar from all 3 of its heads that shook the entire chamber. All eyes widened in absolute shock, even Shadow was caught off guard at the sight of this monster, as was the captive Mimic. Please tell me that's not what I think it is, John gulped. A mutated Goliath, Kira's face paled. And why does it have 3 heads? Ruby exclaimed. Seriously, what is it with this guy and giving Grimm more than 1 head? More than 1 head makes it look more intimating. Sonic summed up, though he did look somewhat nervous at this creature too. It can also be quite effective to cover up any blind spots. Merlot put his 2 cents in. As you can see, this is my largest experiment to date. Just as I've named many of my experiments out of your creatures of myth Sonic, I've named this one the Aravata. And, it's not alone either. Suddenly, multiple openings appeared in the walls around the group of heroes as more and more mutated Grimm crawled out to reveal themselves, ranging from the 3-headed Beowulfs, to the 2-headed and 4-armed Ursai, and more than a few Borbatusk creep hybrids. There were even a couple Death Stalkers that had the upper bodies of Ursai attached to them akin to centaurs. And even that wasn't it. A large port in the ceiling opened up as the Hydra that Tails had fought before also emerged. That's a lot of monsters, Ren said in worry. My remaining experiments, rather generic, but I'm sure that they along with my Aravata and Hydra will be more than effective in eliminating all of you. Merlot grinned. It's been a pleasure, Sonic the Hedgehog. Do try and survive as best you can. With that, the Aravata was the first to attack, lifting its front 2 feet to stomp on the ground and send a wave of crystals in all directions, forcing the heroes to try and dodge however they could, which also separated many of them and forced them to do battle with all the mutants that had been unleashed upon them. In the chaos, Mimic had managed to slip away from Shadow, who would have pursued him only to be intercepted as the Hydra dive-bombed towards him. Hey Doc, I'm kinda in the middle of all this too. Mimic said through the comms. Got an emergency exit planned or something? You seem to be the expert at making quick escapes. I trust you can take advantage of this chaos to slip away. Merlot contacted back. Mimic grimaced. This guy's more sloppy than Eggman. He found a 3-headed Beowulf blocking his attempt at retreating and leapt back to avoid the claws before drawing an energy gun to quickly open fire. Tails had converted the Cyclone into its walker mode with Ruby, Blake, and Omega gathering around him to circle up as multiple mutants surrounded them. They all opened fire with their respective guns as the mutants lunged and charged at them. Though Omega and Tails' more heavier armaments were able to blast back several of the mutants, many of them were already recovering however thanks to their regenerative abilities. One Creep Borbatusk hybrid tried to charge at Omega, only for him to grab it by the horns and throw it into 3 more incoming mutants, which Omega finished off with a series of missiles. It also seemed that Crescent Rose and Gamble Shroud were not as effective either as the mutants quickly closed the distance. Ruby then converted Crescent Rose into its scythe mode as a 3-headed Beowulf was moving in on her. Using her petal burst, Ruby shot forward and swung her scythe to decapitate all 3 of its heads and kill that specific mutant, only to be pinned down by a 2-headed and 4-armed Ursa. Fortunately, Blake had rushed in with her own semblance to grab Ruby and pull her out the same way, allowing Tails to blast a beam of lightning from the cyclone at both of the mutant Ursa's heads to obliterate them and kill that specific mutant. Yang grabbed a charging three-headed Beowulf before slugging it repeatedly into all three of its faces to knock it back before tackling it and proceeded to smash all of its heads in until it was down for the count. But she was tackled in the back by another mutant Beowulf that tried to snap and bite at her, with her struggling to hold all three of its heads back. However, that mutant was pulled back by its hind leg by Omega with one hand and then spun his upper body around rapidly before letting go and sending it flying. The two quickly came back to back as more mutants appeared around them. One mutant Ursa had slapped John back with a swipe of its claws. When it tried to advance on him, Weiss was the first to come to his side and thrust Myrtanaster forward to erect a glyph infused with gravity dust below to pin the mutant down, allowing Pyrrha to come in and bring down Milo, further strengthened by a push from her polarity to cut off one of its heads, while John moved in to hack and slash repeatedly at the second head until it was dislodged. But despite all three of their efforts, Weiss, John, and Pyrrha were surrounded by 6 more mutants on all sides. Nora had blown away 2 mutants Beowulfs with Monhild in its grenade launcher more. But stepping forward from its fallen brethren, was an Ursa Deathstalker hybrid. The second she saw that Grim, her own eyes widened as she remembered another Grim just like that from her childhood. With shaky hands, Nora fired more grenades from Monhild to blast it away, and she kept on firing with a look of desperation and fear in her eyes. But as she seemed focused on the monster in front of her, she was oblivious to the 2 mutant Beowulfs that tried to come at her from behind. "Nora, look out," Amy warned as she had slammed on the back of one mutant with a spin dash of her own before pounding its heads with the Pico Pico, while Ren had fired his grapplers at the feet of the second mutant to trip it up and quickly rushed in to slice off its heads and kill it. This caused Nora to turn around, allowing Ren and Amy to see the panicked look on her face from before. Though Amy was surprised to see such a face on a normally hyper and jubilant girl, Ren had a feeling of dread and yet understanding, especially when he saw the burning remains of the mutant behind her that strongly resembled another beast that Ren remembered all too well. But they didn't have time to worry about that as more mutants appeared around them, forcing them to circle up. In the air, Shadow appeared to be caught in the jaws of the inner right head of the flying Hydra. But he thrusted Arondite up into its head before throwing a Chaos Spear down its throat, forcing it to let him go. While up in the air, Shadow used his rocket skates to propel himself up before performing a homing attack to its back and used his sword to slice off the right wing while throwing another Chaos Spear at its left wing to dislodge it, causing the monster to crash on the ground below, and take down a couple mutants upon impact. Sonic was gunning straight for the Aravata, who tried to lift its feet to stomp down and unleash another wave of crystals, but Sonic shot with a homing attack straight to the middle face. He then proceeded with a series of rapid slashes with Caliburn and homing attacks across the middle face, but this only seemed to irritate the massive mutant as it shook its head to knock Sonic back, forcing him to land on the ground. Its outer 2 heads looked directly at him as their trunks extended to blast columns of green flame at Sonic, who was forced to run back and avoid them. "And it shoots fire. Of course, it shoots fire," Sonic grunted. He gave a gasp as the Aravata charged at him in full speed, and while Sonic tried to run around to its sides and avoid the devastating charge, its right trunk shot another blast of green flame at the ground in front of him, creating an explosion that threw Sonic up in the air. While he was airborne, he was unable to avoid the next charge as the Aravata rammed into him, striking him with a swipe of the tusks of its central head to knock Sonic to the ground hard. "Pretty sure there's a how do you stop an elephant from charging joke here, but I'm kinda drawing a blank." Sonic groaned as he pushed up, only to look in worry as the mighty mutant loomed over him. After having her ice sword shatter, the masked woman had brought her hilt to her sheath once more to draw a glowing yellow blade, one that gave her an extra boost in speed with the lightning dust embedded in it. She, just like before, closed the gap between herself and the mutant kraken. But rather than strike at its face like the last 2 times, she jumped straight up and landed on the cylindrical pillar the beast was attached to, perching herself above it just as all its tentacles shot at her. The masked woman then sheathed her sword and blasted it out with her sheath being akin to a gun, the blade itself lit with electrical power from the ignited lightning dust to zap and blow away all the tentacles. As the woman let herself fall, She grabbed the blade before swinging it to send a wave of lightning down at the creature to completely knock it off the pillar. However, it just as quickly recovered upon landing and sent all of its tentacles to completely ensnare and bind the woman. She struggled initially and grunted in frustration. How is this mindless monster so quick and adaptable to its situation? Merlot must have grabbed an older Grimm that grew in intelligence before it mutated. Maybe she got some of her brother's rotten luck after all. She considered giving off a tiny piece of her power, if only to escape these bindings. When suddenly, the ground beneath the mutant kraken exploded outward, the force sending the beast flying upwards slightly as the one who had just emerged from the metallic ground was none other than Knuckles. This allowed the tentacles to loosen around the woman, giving her a chance to draw her blade and slice them away, while Knuckles grabbed the tentacle closest to him once he landed and used his strength to haul and throw the mutant kraken straight into a wall, causing it to crash through. Knuckles, however, was surprised to see someone else here. A woman whose face he couldn't see behind the grim mask. And if he could see her face, he would see the look of wide-eyed shock. This red rodent tossed that large mutant like a rag doll, but more importantly, he had seen her. Even if he couldn't see her face, this would still cause problems. "Who are you?" Knuckles questioned. Suddenly, the mutant kraken emerged with a roar as its tentacles flailed violently. "You want an explanation, or do you want to kill this thing?" The woman replied as they turned to face it. "Fine." Knuckles accepted, realizing how this mutant took priority. "But I am getting that explanation when this is done." Entering a temporary alliance, the two charged at the mutant. What? For one of the few moments in his life, Merlot was genuinely surprised. How was he able to get in there? I couldn't even see him. How? Suddenly, everything in his control room had deactivated, from all the monitors, to the computers, and even the lights, causing his shock to increase even further. What in goodness, did that circuit board power this whole room? Rouge teased, revealing herself as she sat cockily cross-legged at the open vent she had entered from, holding a broken circuit board in her hand. "It probably doesn't power your whole facility, just this control room. But with that out of power, you've lost control of your whole base, right? Now might be a time to give up while I'm in such a good mood." Merlot glared. Just how did this bat sneak into his control room? Did she follow that woman? And why weren't they together if that was the case? "I'm afraid not, my dear," Merlot replied as he pressed a button on his robotic arm. "I am so close. My formula is nearly perfected." As he ranted, his body began to twitch, much to Rouge's curiosity. Suddenly, 4 conductor coils emerging from his back, tearing away his upper clothing to reveal most of his body was now mechanical, much to Rouge's shock. "And I will not have all my work go to waste." His robot arm changed into some sort of electrical weapon as a sphere of electricity quickly formed before it was blasted at Rouge, who quickly rolled out of the way to avoid it. "Huh, so you're Dr. Frankenstein and his monster all rolled up in one," Rouge commented as she avoided another electrical attack. "It's so easy to get the two mixed up, but you just brought them both together." "A gift courtesy of Dr. Eggman," Merlot replied. "I'm no longer limited by human physique. Though I prefer not to fight directly if it can be helped, I am willing to stand my ground. So, let us break my new body in, shall we?" "Whoa!" Sonic yelped as he dodged another strike of green fire shot at him by the middle trunk of the charging Aravata. He tried to run around the massive beast and rushed directly underneath it, slashing at its legs repeatedly with Caliburn as he zipped across and in between all of them, hoping that if he was fast enough to do enough damage to knock it down. However, the massive mutant had lifted its front legs up high and quickly brought them down just as Sonic tried to make a run for it. The legs had slammed down hard on the ground, creating not only a physical shockwave that blew many of the heroes back, but even sent another wave of crystals that further added to the damage. Already the testing grounds were a mess as many of the mutant Grimm were already killed, though the Hydra and several of the bigger ones remained as Shadow kept his focus mostly on the multi-headed beast. Despite still being grounded, it was still dangerous. Shadow had thrown multiple chaos spears down on the beast's back, specifically the necks, creating multiple explosions that managed to weaken several of the heads, especially the middle ones. Shadow then shot down with a Spindish and Arondite held outward to slice off the middle 2 heads in one strike before firing Arondite's gun mode on his right while throwing another chaos spear on his left to break off the weakened heads of the Hydra. Shadow then set his sights on the Aravata and moved in just as what was left of the Hydra exploded. As RWBY picked herself up from the shockwave, she looked around to see what state her scattered friends were in. Omega and Yang tried to handle the heavy hitters with their physical strength. Nora, Amy, and Ren stuck together to fend off a Deathstalker Ursa hybrid and a few mutant Beowulfs. Tails and Weiss tried to move in and help the recovering Sonic. John, Blake, and Pyrrha were backed into a corner against a mutant Ursa. But then RWBY looked out of the corner of her eye to see a certain shapeshifter about to make his way towards one of the tunnels that she and her friends had entered from. Mimics trying to get away. RWBY shouted, hoping somebody would hear her as she used her petal burst to run as fast as she could to try and intercept him. Mimic noticed the incoming red blur out of the corner of his eye and just barely dodged out of the way to avoid the swing of RWBY's crescent rose. He backed on his feet with a glare as he drew an energy gun to shoot at RWBY, who jumped backwards before converting Crescent Rose into its rifle mode and returned fire, blasting the gun out of Mimic's hand. NNGH, nice shot. Mimic growled. But that's not my only trick. He reached into his robe to throw out a series of grenades, which RWBY tried to run away from, but the explosion did blast her back to the ground. You got some skill, kid. Mimic admitted as he pulled out his knife as he moved in to finish her off. With some training, you'd actually be formidable. Before he got his chance to slash at her, he was pushed back by a glyph that suddenly appeared in front of him. He turned around in surprise to see Weiss angrily swing Myrtanaster to send waves of fire and ice at him, which Mimic was unable to dodge, and the resulting elemental attack blasted him away, straight to where Blake was waiting. She then leapt into the air and delivered a powerful kick to Mimic's back and knocked him towards the charging Yang. With a yell and her eyes glowing red, and her hair lit on fire, Yang quickly closed the distance and connected her fist to Mimic's face to smash him hard into the ground. Weiss was already at RWBY's side and helping her up before all of Team RWBY gathered around the impression where Mimic laid in an unconscious heap. Give me a reason we don't finish him right now. Yang growled. Because he could have information about Eggman that can be useful. Blake said. Believe me, I want to rip him apart too, but we need him alive. That's provided the rest of us make it out alive right now. Weiss pointed out as the rest of their friends were still in a tight spot against all the remaining mutants. Pyrrha and John used both their shields and charged at a mutant Ursa to knock it flat on its back. While John tried to hold it down, Pyrrha acted quickly to slice at its necks repeatedly with both her sword and shield, only for both of them to get rammed off by a creep Borbatusk hybrid and knocked towards two more with 3 mutant Beowulfs joining them. Ren fired Stormflower's grapplers to entangle the Ursa body and the stinger of the Deathstalker mutant in front of him and keep it pinned, while Amy and Nora both combined their hammer strikes as they struck from behind to smash in the back of its head. Only to end up facing a mutant Ursa right as the mutant they killed exploded. Sonic and Shadow tried to run up and around the Aravata, delivering homing attacks, spindishes, sword slices, with even chaos spears and gunshots from Shadow, but none of their attacks seemed to be doing any real damage. Any damage the mutant Goliath did sustain was quickly healed. It swung the tusks of its right head into Sonic to send him flying and crashing along the wall while the center head fired another blast of green flame from its trunk at Shadow, who tried to perform an airborne spindish to blow the fire around him, but the force of the attack itself still knocked Shadow back. Suddenly, an explosion erupted at the side of the Aravata left head as Tails and Omega stood together, their respective weapons out and ready. Concentrate all your firepower at its neck. Tails exclaimed as he readied the Cyclone's heavy armaments. He couldn't risk using the power laser again or else the Cyclone might break down. Copy. Ready to unleash all stockpiled dust. Omega confirmed. With that, both the Cyclone and Omega unleashed massive blasts of fire, lightning, ice, and other forms of weaponized dust right at the point that Tails had identified, right in the side of the neck of the Aravata's left head. The explosion was rather large, and it was able to knock the mutant Goliath back somewhat, with the monster groaning in pain. However, when the dust settled, it did appear that the left head was partially dislodged as most of its neck was blown away. But if one looked closely enough, one could see that it was already beginning to regenerate.